Yeah, that's grand, yeah. Morning. Morning. I didn't realise it was new.
Chair,
I should not hear anything. Okay, members.
Chair, we are now live. Thank you.
Okay, members. I'd like to welcome you to the weekly meeting of the ERA Committee. The committee is quorate, and we're ready to begin. We recorded online and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. You can use your mobile devices so long as they are muted and in airplane mode, and all devices are muted. I don't have. There's a few members who may be coming in a bit late this morning, but we have no apologies. We have no apologies in, so having so and we're quorate. In terms of moving on to chairperson's business, there was a number of members had spoken to me yesterday evening about concerns relating to the decision regarding the ports. Sorry, Patsy, yeah. Patsy, you need to unmute. Patsy, you're muted.
Sorry, I unmuted myself and somebody muted me.
Yeah, you're okay.
What we're I should have that before. It never worked. Anyway, Chair, just in regard to the decision by the Minister yesterday and the obvious implications of it and the serious ramifications of it, I heard Maria McGuinness, the Commissioner, EU Commissioner Maria McGuinness, as I'm sure others heard her on the radio this morning, talk about it being a breach of international law. So clearly, what I would like to propose is that we have a special meeting as soon as possible with the Permanent Secretary at the Department to understand what advice they are acting upon, because it seems as though the Minister's acted on advice out with the Department, indeed out with the Executive, to support his decision. So could I propose that we have a special meeting as soon as possible with the Permanent Secretary to get the handle specifically from a departmental view as to the legal position and the ramifications of the Minister's instruction?
Yeah, thank you. And Patsy, yourself and a few of our members, we had obviously all the late sessions last few days there, and this was something that's caused great concern, obviously, but no breach of international law. Do you want to, sorry, John, you want to come in there, because I'm going to get Nick to come in. John?
Chair, yes, and thank you. And to back up what Patsy said there, look, there are, of course, political reasons behind what happened, I assume, in relation to the attempt to stop checks and withdraw staff from ports again. The reality is, and I don't intend to re-rehearse all of the political arguments around this, but the Minister, as far as I can see, has been advised on previous occasions that this should not be done. And that advice came from DEFRA and also from his own officials. Quite separate to that, it creates a lot of uncertainty for our vital sectors, such as logistics and freight, and that is something they don't need at this difficult time. So for that reason, I think we should be asking the department senior officials and the permanent secretary level, of course, for a meeting as soon as possible, and that we should schedule that meeting outside of our normal agenda if that's what that requires. I've made my own separate request, of course, to meet with the officials on behalf of Alliance, but as well as that, I think the Assembly needs to be fully briefed, Chair, and I'd appreciate any help that could be given in relation to that. Thank you.
Yeah, Nick, do you want to come in on that, Nick, because that's something that I flagged up yourself last night?
Yeah.
Chair, thank you. Yes, indeed. It's just for all members' attention following a discussion with the Chair yesterday evening, and we put a formal request into the Department yesterday evening at about 20 to 7 to seek the Permanent Secretary's availability to brief the committee today on the potential implications of the Minister's instruction. We were advised yesterday evening that the Permanent Secretary was currently considering the implications of the instruction and therefore would not be in a position to attend and brief the committee today. However, if the committee does agree to seek an urgent ad hoc meeting to hear from the Permanent Secretary, we will of course facilitate that at the earliest opportune time.
Yeah, I think that the situation is so serious that I don't think we can wait to next week's meeting. So if the committee were in agreement that whenever, at the very earliest opportunity, that the Permanent Secretary and the Chief Vet, when they would be available, that I hope the committee might agree that we would convene at short notice to discuss this and discuss the potential implications of this decision.
Chair, Chair, just a note, we will follow that up immediately, but of course we will liaise with members as to the time for that meeting, but just to advise members that we would need to ensure a quorum is present for that meeting in order to discuss the matters that will arise. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Okay, members, I'm just going to move on here. Continuing on Chairperson's business, in the table of papers, future agriculture policy, there's a response from the Minister to a request to extend the consultation deadline in the future agriculture policy. The Minister explains that he is unable to extend the deadline as an 8-week consultation period in line with policy consultation notice as agreed in the Fresh Start Agreement. The Minister notes that engagement in the strategy commenced in 2018 and that a DAERA Future Agriculture Policy Group was formed in 2021 to help inform the proposals. So members, you know, this is the third. There's only 12 days left to respond to this very important and long important consultation, which has huge implications for the future of farm businesses here. And our members content that we reply to the Minister outlining our disappointment the consultation deadline can't be extended, and that this could potentially limit the opportunities for stakeholders to provide feedback, because I think you must also remember too that this was launched just a few days before Christmas. So, you know, obviously people during the Christmas period had other things that they were involved in, and that would have certainly impacted as well. Members, okay, we write back to the department about this. Okay, members, the Wildlife Order NI 1985. We were scheduled to receive a pre-consultation briefing on the Wildlife Order. General bird licences at next week's meeting. However, the department has asked us to defer this until the 24th of February. Okay, members. Members, moving on to Climate Change Number 2 Bill. Members, for the formal record, the advice received from the Assembly's Legal Service Department in respect of queries raised regarding the Climate Change Number 2 Bill is included in page 5 of your packs. The clerk emailed this to members in advance of the consultation stage debate. Item number 3 is the draft minutes. The draft minutes from the 27th of January, page 12. Members, okay, if I can sign this, so I'll be up there certainly at the start of the week to sign them. Is that okay? Okay, members, matters arising, page 24 your pack. Draft report by European Commission Directorate General for Health and Safety, which was laid in the Assembly Business Office on Friday 20th of January. It outlines the Commission's findings in respect of an assessment carried out in June last year regarding SPS checks on border post-compliance with EU regulations relating to the protocol. The Commission concludes that there are several factors, including the lack of sufficient human and structural resources, which collectively and critically undermine the credibility of guarantees by the UK Government and the full implementation of the protocol. The report is extremely critical of HMRC Border Force as well as DAERA. Members, are you content that we engage with DAERA on this report? You know, and also in relation to the decision made yesterday. And we need to, specifically in this matter, ask when DAERA first received the report and to whom it was sent, what actions have been taken in respect of the shortcomings identified, and what steps does the department plan to take in the next 3 months to improve compliance? Okay, members. Okay, members, we're at item number 5 here now on the agenda, and that is oral briefing from the NI Pork and Bacon Forum in relation to workforce labour issues. And members, for some time now, the committee has engaged with relevant authorities in a bid to address the ongoing shortage of skilled butchers and its impact on the local agri-food sector. As you will be aware, changes to immigration laws means that producers here and in Britain are dealing with workforce gaps, leading to a backlog of animals needing culled and subsequent welfare issues on farms and serious economic consequences to farmers. You'll recall the committee liaised with the Home Office to seek clarity on the measures being taken to alleviate these pressures, and whilst temporary views have been made, has extended to 800 workers. Uptake on these has been minimal. Can I welcome Deirdre McIver, Chief Executive of the Pork and Bacon Forum, and invite Deirdre to brief the committee on the issues facing the local producers. Deirdre, you're very, very welcome, and it's great to have you here this morning. So you want to just kick off there, and members will ask questions after you complete your briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and members. Appreciate the opportunity to update you on this. And I think I had circulated something earlier about mid last year, about the crisis as it was growing. The issue of access to labour, you should be aware, as a consequence of Brexit, and the closing down of access to labour to Europe initially, and then also the implications of accessing global labour, on a worldwide scale. It's having severe impacts on the industry, and that continues, particularly in the region of skilled butchers. Now, as you will be aware, Westminster did make an offer it made quite a lot of PR around it, of making 800 skilled workers available for the sector across the UK. But this was done just about the end of October. And the duration of the time that they were going to permit these workers to come into the country was just 3 months. It's entirely too short, and at that particular time or at any other time, one would query why anyone would want to give up jobs that they maybe already have, in their country of origin, to come here just for 3 months. And apart from anything else, how welcome does that make you feel when these people before want to become valued, integrated members of our society and have contributed significantly to the industries here that wouldn't have been able to operate, without that? This is something that's affecting not just the pork sector, but I think, as mentioned to you previously on the papers, it impacts particularly severely on the pork sector, or more quickly, should I say, because of the nature of the just-in-time efficiency of the sector, whereby the production of pork runs through on farms through to the finishing units. And as pigs, move off into the factories, the next lot are ready to move through, and it works very, very effectively. It's worked very, very efficiently over the years, and it's exactly the kinds of models that agriculture would be encouraging farmers to adopt, to increase efficiencies of this nature. But if there are no skilled butchers available in the factories, then that's impacting the availability of workers to process the meat. And it's the added value aspect of the business that's taking the hit most severely. If there are no skilled butchers there to bone the meat out, to further process it into bacon, hams, etc., and to pack it, that's impacting the availability of product that they can make for the supermarkets, their key clients. And in fact, I think, over this past few months, we have seen the suppliers, the processors here, having to turn down business with these organisations. Purely because they just haven't had the work staff there available to produce the product. They have attempted to try and work on the backlog of pigs backing up on farms. Now, as you probably may be aware, these pigs will get increasingly heavy in weights. There's a limited amount of space, on farm premises to keep them. And it ultimately would lead to the rising of an animal welfare issue there. But they have attempted to try and deal with backlog, but in doing that has impacted on the price available to farmers. The factories have tried to do additional kills by taking staff away from the added value aspect of the business and moving them into the slaughter hall, something that staff don't want to do. And prior to Christmas, Cranswick worked with their staff to try and put on additional Saturday kills to try and deal with some of these heavier pigs. That worked to some extent, but it's not something that can be done as a long-term strategy. And, it costs a lot because workers want to be paid more to do that. And in many cases, they're being so well paid now, the incentive of getting overtime is irrelevant to them. So this is continuing. And as well as that, we're continuing with very high input costs on farms. Farmers are having to deal with energy costs, as everyone is at this moment in time, but particularly, since the early parts of last year, the increasing price of feed has just, it's hit an all-time high. That continues. And it's ironic that you're feeding heavier pigs to try and keep them on farm. Even you're reducing, the value of the product there. You're trying to moderate, the weights of the pigs. So that will continue, and the farmers are then dealing with having to place heavier weight pigs into the market, and that takes on significance insofar as they will be penalised for those products that are not ready for the market. So that continues, and those products are being sold bone in onto the European market just at a very, very low level price, and that continues to depress the market further. Can you hear me? I see some frozen faces here on the screen.
Well, I can hear you all right anyway, Deirdre. As other members,
That's okay. That's fine. I'll just finish.
I can hear you okay anyway, Deirdre.
I'll just continue. That's good. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair.
thank you.
That's good. And yes, and just to highlight that there are additional problems with the heavier weight pigs insofar as the lines on the factory floor are not designed to cope with that, so that causes breakages and breakdowns, which further impacts the slowing down of the production lines in those premises. So there's more product being then condemned. So it's a very, very grave situation that we're facing here. I have lobbied with the roundtable committee that Westminster had with to address this particular issue into DEFRA and into the Home Office. We're not getting a lot of feedback on that just as yet, and it's been very frustrating. And I highlighted that in comments made as follow-up comments to hear, Minister Eustace saying that everything has been made available to the pork sector, but none of these offers have been taken up by the industry, which is in fact not the case. Additionally, we're faced with the problems surrounding carbon dioxide, which, as you may know, is a requirement in the slaughter processing, particularly of pigs and poultry. It's used also then in the further processing of the gas flushed packs as they're made ready for supermarkets. We were made on a priority list, because of the implications for animal welfare as a result. While the government was discussing measures to keep CF fertiliser industries, continuing in the production of CO2. And as you've heard, yesterday, it was announced that measures had been arranged or had come to an extension on that. We haven't been made aware of the details of that, but as much as I've been told is that it will be sufficient for at least 3 months. But other than that, they're saying that's a commercial arrangement with CEF industries, and that's as far as it goes. But as you will be aware, there's a huge call on supplies of CO2 from the drinks industry particularly as well, and they're also levying quite aggressively on this point. But the cost of this CO2 has gone up exponentially, so that in turn adds to the pressures on the processing side of things. And they're looking at medium to long-term strategies to see how things may be improved for production of CO2, in the future. But that sits around at the moment, as far as I've been made aware, the production of, using some indigenous production and bringing in imports. But that also would create some concerns that will increase the price further on this. Just to finish off, it's just in summary, these very, very high input costs that farmers are facing, that there's just no immediate resolutions in sight. On top of that, the factories are dealing with the CO2, isolations. We've managed exceptionally well with controlling that in the premises, and that continues. But if staff are told, you're a close contact, school children, people working in the factories, then they have to isolate for a few days. That all adds to the problem of getting work in. And as far as the markets are concerned, we have just seen our core markets like China becoming a bit sluggish. It's not quite running at the high levels that it was. It's still a very important market to have, but we really, really need things done to try and get access to these workers, because the indigenous work supply is just not there on the home markets. And in particular, I would highlight maybe if Westminster's policy seems to sit okay with the tier 2 applications to bring workers in. Could they do something to expedite that process, getting workers in from further reaches around the globe? We've had some come in from the Philippines recently to Carrow and Cookstown, but that whole process took about the best part of a year. It's very expensive to get those workers in, and that long red tape lead time is just hampering that even further. So it's a very grave situation, and for farmers to be quiet-ish at the moment, I think their heads are down. But this is just something that's not going to go away, and it's particularly frustrating when we have an industry here which is worth around £440 million, and there's huge potential for growth and there is demand for the product, but access to the labour is what's crippling it. And I just appreciate very much your efforts and trying to continue to highlight this, because it is big policy at Westminster, and we need it. We need it across the UK, not just in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. That's a very helpful briefing and extremely stark, and you referred to it as a grave situation. Deirdre, see in relation to the 800 workers across the UK, how many of them, how many did those workers were able to get into the north, and how many would we actually need, to bring our production, our processing levels back to the appropriate standard again?
Of those 800, Mr. Chairman, none actually made it into Northern Ireland. There was very active engagement from the processors, because I'm sure, as you're aware, there was an agency or a couple of agencies appointed by the UK government to deal with this process. And there was sort of lots of meetings via Teams with very little information, and the HR departments of these companies tried, to engage with them and say, what can we do? Or we know we have sourced workers, for example, from this region, from this country prior to, Brexit and everything like that. So perhaps, you could help, to engage with them to come back again here, but nothing, and it just very much petered out. They didn't seem to be really able to do much more than that. There were some workers, I understand, it brought into a site in England, about, I don't know, don't quote me exactly, somewhere between 30, 40 odd, I think it was. But where they came from, they were not, in the end, as skilled as they were led to believe. And their level of English was, so low that training them was made very, very difficult indeed. So it didn't work in that particular instance, but that's in England. But here we didn't get any of those 800 workers. Now, initially when we were doing counts, across the board, we were estimating somewhere in the region, if we got, between 180, 200 workers, it would make a significant difference at that point to bring, if we could get those skilled butchers in here. And we had also asked, as I'm sure you're aware, and we had highlighted this in all our contacts with the Migration Advisory Committee from early stages throughout, if we could get those butchers, those skilled workers, put on the shortage occupation list and even reduce the English language requirements somewhat. I mean, even if it was not up to the qualification, the companies here are more than happy to help those people with night classes, to help sponsor them, to help get them, to that required level. Because, I mean, clearly it's in everyone's interests, to help them in those fashions, because you want to encourage them to stay here, to integrate, to participate, to be, part of the process, and very good conditions that they would make available. They also provide housing for these workers as well, so which is not always easy. I mean, getting access sometimes, and then if you're not sure what the lead time is going to be before you may be successful in getting them, you're paying to keep those premises, which further adds to the cost of that are having to be borne. And and it just adds increasingly, as you say, to farmers, you feel their heads are down, they're really under severe pressure, economically at the minute. It's just a really nasty perfect storm of everything hitting at this point.
And Deirdre, tell me this, how many workers have we lost, as a consequence of Brexit and the British Home Office rules?
Oh gosh, I can get you an exact updated figure of that. If I might, I'll email that through to Nick, because I spoke to them back in July, and people were telling me on a weekly basis, for example, when you had workers coming in, they had lost 50 workers, for example, at one tranche. But when you try to recruit people, such is the nature of things at the moment. It's a bit of a buyer's market or a seller's market when it comes to that there's so much demand out there that workers would come. It's difficult. Indigenous workers coming in here, here applying for the jobs, they don't want to do these jobs. And that is something we've highlighted. Maybe there needs to be a job of work done to try and, promote or improve or try and, attract people into those industries. But, it's maybe not the nicest job, to work in a slaughter hall or in some of those processing facilities, that doesn't appeal to people. But workers are turning up, there's time being lost, and they decide in 2 days, oh, it's not for me, and then it's back on benefits or whatever. But Mr. Chairman, I will give you an updated figure just so that you have the absolute figure, against that, because that changes, and I wouldn't want to mislead you now, because that has changed over the last 6 months as people have gone, and I can align that with what was lost originally as a result of the Brexit, people leaving, and then as a result of, just workers leaving because they didn't want to be part of that, because they could move off and be part of, for everything from working in McDonald's to moving to, any other job that was out there, and quite literally saying, I don't want that bonus, I'm leaving now, but sure, the meat factory will be there. If I don't like this, I can come back again. That's kind of where they're sitting. So I will send that to you.
Yeah, and Jerry, just finally, because there's a few members that want to ask questions.
Yes.
Are you familiar with what are there pressures with some of your counterpart processing operations in south of Ireland? See the workers who had been here. Did they go? Did they go back to their country where they originally came from, or did they move south? Which is still part of the EU. Are you familiar with any of the pressures that might be in the south, or no? Has some of the workers moved to processing plants south because it remains in the EU, or what? Are you familiar with that, Deirdre?
Oh, clearly, Mr. Chairman, you're quite right that gives us we're at a little bit of a disadvantage in that, down south they can still access workers from the EU, and that did continue. But even it was interesting to note that just the pressures of working within that system, their whole system was coming under a bit of pressure as well. So that if their ability to access, which they still were, they were clearly getting workers from the EU, but even there were reports that was slowing down a little bit. But then on top of that, they have been able to access more readily from the global working pool, and taking in skilled butchers, for example, from Brazil, which was something that they had established. So while they were, towards the end of the year, starting to feel the pressure of the access to EU workers again, as you say, the demands, the availability of workers, maybe back in their own country, being incentivized to stay there. They were starting to feel the pinch a bit, but not as severely as we have been, because they have had that other access to the global work pool as well. And I would say that their access to EU workers was not as severely impacted, clearly, because, as you rightly say, they had access to that European pool of workers already.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. John? John?
Yeah, Chair, just waiting for my mic there. Deirdre, first of all, thank you. I did hear all of the presentation, and you've given us some detail on the seriousness of this issue. The chair of the committee has referenced that also. Can I ask, and the chairman did address a number of issues that I was going to ask questions around, but more broader basis, Deirdre, can you give us any insight into how much contact there's been with the department, DAERA, and if there's been any assistance offered from there, and also obviously the Department for Economy, if they're contacting you or in touch with you in relation to the general jobs issue? Members were hearing about this in some detail as well, as far back as the Balmoral show when we were there.
Yes.
It was September, and we're aware. Members we've discussed it here. We've raised it as a committee. We've also, himself included, raised it in questions to the Minister when the opportunities arise, and we'll continue to do so. But we're keen to know what engagement there is with the departments, I suspect.
Thank you, John. Yes, you're right. It has been raised from way back, and even since back in early August, we were having meetings with Minister Poots, to highlight the problem, and he's very, on board with that. But as he said, in many ways, he says, I'm just a lobbyist like the rest of you. But, one would have hoped that maybe, politicians like yourselves would be a little further up the food chain in terms of access to government departments in Westminster. And we would keep them updated on what we would be doing, what I would be doing myself, on any of this, to keep them abreast of that. But he has engaged, he has met with us. We have done media. I've done media myself around, Balmoral time, just to try and make people aware of what's going, on, how it is. And we engage regularly with DAERA. There would be stakeholder meetings, as you're aware, every Wednesday. There's one which initially was based, on COVID primarily, but has widened out, and you have the opportunity to raise those points again, and the seriousness which I do on the gravity of what's affecting us in the sector right now. So it's been kept alive there. The Permanent Secretary would be very well aware. Department for Economy should be aware, but I had engaged with them, but the responses back have not been so positive, or in terms of what could be done, to move on through these things at all.
Deirdre, thanks for that. You mentioned there that the minister was on board. I hope by the end of today he's still on board and hasn't jumped ship with his colleagues. I'm sure you'll agree, and I'm not trying to politicise this. This is an example of where that devolved power, that local minister, is crucial to a sector such as yours, and where efforts can be made at a local level, and where we might need to ramp up, at the very least, the contact with the Department for the Economy. But we'll need the ministers there in the first place, and I'm guessing that if the committee can assist in contact the economy as well, or through that committee, we will try to do that, and I'm happy to discuss that with colleagues. I'm assuming, do you know if there's any meetings scheduled for coming days or coming weeks that the committee might not be aware of at this time?
Nothing that I have seen scheduled. I mean, we've liaised with them. Farmers Union as well would have arranged at times on their own belt with that. We would have done it, in concurrence, bringing all, members in together, to speak about it. But there's nothing in the diary on meetings specifically around this. I know climate change is taking very much a big chunk of the agenda, as it and rightly so as it is. But this is an ongoing issue, and for the Department of the Economy, just, which I thought was a bit trite, the Minister suggested there that we just engage with the Kendall report, that IFRAC report, which has been produced now. And we had already done that. We'd done that extensively, but that is not going to do anything. We had already highlighted there that any possible plans that we have for growth, there's little point in talking about that if we cannot get access to the labour, to do this. And we're told constantly, what the message is. The message is from Priti Patel's office. If you pay the workers the wage, all the boats will rise together, and it's a more efficient economy. And you think pure economic theory like that, yes, we all understand it, and that sounds lovely in a sentence, but it's not working in practice. And workers are being in some cases for some months now, 4% above the rate of inflation is what their wages are. And, that all adds to the cost. So you wonder when the house of cards will tip over. You wonder, farmers are already saying, I don't know how long I can maybe stay in business here. This is... It's an effect to them as well. It also stymies their access to labour too, I should say. We have farmers who are trying to bring in workers on the Tier 2 system from as far away as Ghana. That's the nature of where we sit with this. So, you're right. And factories, I should point out, John, will automate as far as possible. They're already doing the investment they need to try and research that, but that's not something that can be done overnight, and it requires a high level of financial investment there, and takes time to develop those techniques and put them in place. But all of those options are currently being looked at anyway, but they won't be the ultimate solution to everything, because not all of those jobs can be immediately transferred onto robotic automation. So to just say automate and you will improve is not, it's not as simple as that. Would that it were, quite frankly.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Okay. Harry?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Much appreciated. And good to see you today, Deirdre. Deirdre, my worry would be with the farmers having to feed their pigs, and they're backing up, the stock's backing up, and have to clean them out and look after them and do all sorts of things. As far as future stock would go, and breeding new stock, they're obviously, they can't keep going on. They can't keep breeding new stock, having more wee pigs to feed and bring on, and when the older ones aren't really going anywhere. My worry would be, is there a chance this could create a shortage later on of pork and pig products? Thank you.
Yes, sorry, this is, is a matter for concern. There have been more pigs about. As I say, farmers are very good at their job in some cases, and things are increasing in that way. And you think, getting increased litter sizes, doing all of the good genetics, all of the good work, will suddenly have to be hampered. But it's a frightening thought to suggest, what do we need to do here? Do we need to cut back the breeding herd? Now, that is something that has been, it's been mooted as something that might be something that has to be faced, but it's not something they like to discuss, to say that we're doing this. Out there, while it's not actively reported, there may be some who may be not serving sows for the next rotation, cutting back a little bit as they see that. But to say that that's happening on a widespread footing just yet, I wouldn't say was correct. But you're right. That, for example, farmers would be quite hopeful, and I would say that pig farmers particularly, they're resourceful. They are ready to take on new things. I mean, we were just reviewing our codes of practice, which is a voluntary scheme to try and ensure that disease is kept out, serious disease is kept out of these islands, and that's done within our sector in concert with colleagues down south on an all-island basis, if you like, to protect, from that perspective. So they're ready to take on new ideas, to develop new techniques, and it's very, very, it's worrying for them that this is not something that's within their gift to try and sort out themselves. And you're right, if we suddenly now say, well, we're not serving the next batch of sows or whatever, it's in about 10 months' time down the road that starts to impact then, and then you see shortages. And if you keep on doing this, you are effectively eroding an industry and taking it away. And it has very worrying consequences. So it's not just as easy as saying, how can we moderate this? It has seen some businesses exit the industry in England already. But, here it's something that it's very in their minds, and it's worrying to say, what do we do to get rid of these? And that's another problem in saying, if we're going to cut back on that, or if they're going to, heaven forfend, you don't want to even speak of it, but if they're having to cut sows out of the breeding herd, we don't have a processing facility for that, so you're depending again on sending them across to England to have that done there, and there the cost implications around that, and there may not be, the demand or the availability to take those. So there's all kinds of factors in that equation, which you're very right is very, very concerning.
Yep. Thank you very much. Excellent answers, Deirdre, and you can.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Patsy? Patsy?
Yeah, that's me now. We're on now.
Yeah.
Hello, Deirdre. How are you? And thanks for being with us here today. Now, if I could ask you you've gone into considerable detail there. If we could highlight the problem, and if we could have an action column and who's to action it. And I would also be very interested to find out just what feedback you've had either from on the economic issues from the Department for the Economy or ERA, in fact, around how these issues, particularly around labour, have been highlighted or raised at the Joint Committee, or is there anything, the Joint EU-British Government Committee, to see if there has been any progress made there, any feedback from either of the two devolved departments here. So if you could just give us that, summarise, as I know you will, you're very good at that, summarise the principal issues and the action column, and if you like, who should be actioning things, and if there are deficiencies in the actions that aren't been taken, please, for us. And just one final thing, and I don't want to get you drawn into the politics, but as you know, the Minister has made a decision to withdraw staff from the ports, and I did note that you referred to it's very important to prevent serious disease for pigs coming in. So I think we would like to have reassurances too that as a committee that none of those staff are being withdrawn who are responsible for ensuring and making sure that those checks are there too, because they're there and always have been there for a very, very obvious reason.
Yeah. I think, just on that, as far as that, I think it's, I'm a bit, I'm bewildered on a personal level what's going on with that, and I was certainly unaware that you could suddenly stop these things. I mean, clearly I would say our industry, and I know other industries would say, we need the Northern Ireland Protocol. We need it so that we can trade. We need it so that we can trade on an island basis, and across the UK. And we need it, let's put it bluntly, we want the peace and security of our country here. We're working well on an all island kind of front. These are very practical and vital industries, factors beyond, everything else that's specific to a given industry. So I would hope, I would say, have every confidence that the department vets, at the challenge would be keeping an eye on these matters, because this is clearly a very vital area, Patsy. And frankly, my head hadn't quite gone to that place yet. But you're absolutely right. If there are any live animals coming in, they should be aware of that. If there's breeding stock coming in, that should be, verified and checked. It would only be, from our perspective, breeding stock, for example, that would be arriving. There wouldn't be any animals coming in for slaughter per se. Yes. But that is very, very vital that those things maintain there. I think, and even just from a perspective of credibility, I don't think you would want messages leaking out in the ether there that there's anything that says, oh, there's no checks being done. I mean, China, for example, a hard-won market to find. And I did say earlier, it's not quite as buoyant as it had been, but that's a vital, very critical market for us. And you just don't want them. That everything is measured. It's monitored. It's watched here, and you don't want miscomments in the press or anything floating out that leaves people to think, well, hang on a wee minute, no checks. What's going on here? Is anything? Is there a breakdown in that fluidity? Are there a breakdown in any of those guarantees that we understood are taking place? Because they just don't. Even if it's not the case, they just. If it's enough to suggest to them that there might be a worry, they are, a law to themselves, and they could just say this has implications on all fronts for us on COVID and everything. We're just we're going to delist you, and we just don't need that. So it's worrying on those fronts very much so. And just so you were saying, for things that we would be asking for, within the department, certainly I highlighted till they're maybe tired that I'm shouting about it, that it's this engagement, it's the round table with Neil Parish, I think, chaired that, the MP that was chairing that. That was important to be able to put into, and, you're asked for updates on that. And I think just there needs to be, I know it's not easy. I know this is government's immigration policy, and UK government is not going to shift readily on these things. But I think we just need help through all of those government departments like DEAR or whatever to press just how vital that is for our industry, because it's affecting us. It's very worrying. It bites us more quickly, but it will have impact right across the board. I mean, Moy Park are having similar issues. The red meat sector would say, the same, that if it isn't biting on them as severely as us just now, just because, the welfare issue, cattle can stay out in a field, cattle can stand inside, their finishing times are not as short or as speedy as for the pig sector. But it's affecting everybody. It will affect them all. So it's vital. I think this still needs to be top of the agenda. And I haven't heard as much back through the Department of the Economy as to what they are saying. That sort of direct engagement has not been as, I raised it to them, but, you're told to raise it through the Candle report, which we did, but that's not going to be the answer. It was highlighted in that already. It's just more forceful, more help to keep that on the agenda or push it further. And then I would think just for farmers, because they will be feeling, they will need some kind of financial support. And like we've been told, there isn't any there. I know we were given money, and I know it has been highlighted in the English press a bit, where they're lobbying their government to say, Northern Ireland has had 2 tranches of funding for the pork sector. Nothing to do with the labour. That was one, as you will all well be aware, that when the Cranswick site had to close temporarily due to COVID back in September 2020, yes. and temporarily took themselves away from the Chinese market until things were put right. There was compensation given then by DEAR through that COVID fund for those producers who were affected, by the loss of that business, who had to, we had to work a long, hard road to try and get things back on an even keel after that. It was very grave. And then there was a similar bit of smaller support given because the cull sow market was very gravely impacted, as a result of COVID, when certain businesses in Germany which take that product had to close down and cut back due to COVID instances on their plants. So a completely different issue, unrelated. That was a COVID fund. But going farmers are they're really feeling it, the loss, the impact. It's very severe. So it would be good if there could be some engagement to say what might be there, what could be there, to help them in the future, because this problem's just not going to go away overnight, and it sits very much with the labour issue. And it's just worrying. I don't know what else to say sometimes to the Secretary of State's department, to say, this just means an end to an industry. Is that what you want? And does it lead us to worry that is that what you do want, because you're brokering trade deals with, America, etc., and all those countries that want to bring their product in here, and we would be traded off in favour of some other quid pro quo they might offer in respect of aviation, manufacturing, technology, all of those kinds of sectors. So keeping that live was a very, this centres on the labour point very, very much, and to say, it's big policy, we can't do much. We have to try, which is why I'm so grateful that you're giving me the time this morning to highlight it with yourselves.
Chair, thank you for that, Deirdre. Chair, just on that point, I don't know whether this is appropriate or not, but I know recently the Minister for Finance announced that there was about 100 million of an underspend there. Would it be appropriate just that I suggest that we write to the department and see, are there any sorts of support measures that could be put in place? Because really the industry, as Deirdre has explained to us there, is in a difficult place. If I could make that proposal, please, that we write to the department and see what can be sourced, even at this fairly late stage.
Yeah, it's okay. Head on. Patsy, thanks for that. Kim, come on. Okay, William? William?
Can you hear me now okay?
We got you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Deirdre, for your update. I suppose on the labour issue, and it is an issue, obviously, and we know for some time it has been an issue, but it is interesting that in the Irish Republic that are still in Europe, it's also an issue, give it to a lesser degree, but as you have said, they've been able to source labour outside the EU. I think that's important, that every effort is made to make things easier to get labour from outside the EU. I think there are workers in India prepared to come to Northern Ireland to work, but the red tape around being able to get them into the country, I think, is a big issue. Deirdre, in relation to backup on pigs on farm, how many pigs are imported at the moment? What percentage of Northern Ireland are pigs killed in Northern Ireland are imported from the Irish Republic?
Oh, as a percentage, I mean, Carol, that's a long-standing part of their business model, and they would be killing in the region of between around 8,000 and 9,000 a week would be coming up from that model. But there was quite a bit of aggrievement at one stage when they cut back on that severely to try and deal with what was happening up here. But it's maybe not easy to be as simple as saying, well, we've got a welfare issue here, we're trying to deal with that. We're not going to kill your pigs so you can deal with that. So there were a few farmers thrown under the bus a bit down south, with that.
Deirdre, I would have thought 9,000 pigs is quite a sizable percentage of the Northern Ireland kill, isn't that?
No, well, there was about 35,000 a week killed here, and 36,000 a week, yeah, in total, of the Northern Ireland kill, yeah, and that's the Northern Ireland kill, and but we've been aware of that. They're even if they divest from that entirely, but it has been a long-standing part of the Carrow business model, as they say, to keep the throughput. I think the strategy that would be coming from them would be say that longer term, as we grow the business, we don't need to continue with the pigs from the south. And that product doesn't go forward as a British quality assured product to that premium into the UK market to deal with those supermarkets. That's used to be sold down south to markets like their customers down south, Dunn stores, or any of their clientele across there under that. And we don't get the accreditation of the full board BA, but that the quality assurance or accreditation that they will give them for those products down in Southern Ireland. But that's I think they make that's free and clear. They're well aware of that. But I think even if they were to cease that, it doesn't solve all the problems. We have Cranswick, or a production plant, as you were well aware, up in Ballymena, and also the smaller facility of William Grant's up in Campsie in the northwest. The problem still maintains. It's still there. And I would say that at one stage, farmers could even understand that it was a benefit that there were those pigs in the south, because when they were trying to deal with the backlog, for example, back when the COVID struck the Cranswick site, that they were making arrangements to try and move the kill of those pigs so that could be done at a loss to Carrows, that they moved them to other processors to see if they would take them on. Of course, that was a benefit to them to get them cheaper, and then free up that additional capacity to try and help manage with the backlog that was building up as a result of having that site closed, for those 2 weeks. So there's times, that it was a benefit, if you will, to have it in that, although it's not an ideal kind of scenario to have to be working through, William. But but you're right.
Well, you can fully understand local producers saying, I can't get all my pigs away, but they're important pigs. I mean, you can understand how they feel about that. Someone's not too happy. And I don't think for 1 minute that they would need to be a total stop of importing pigs. I'm not saying that should happen, but you'd think there'd be relaxation in that under the circumstances. Overweight pigs are then heavily cut in price, which
that's right.
is beyond the farmer's control again, because they're not taking the pigs often.
That's right. The overweight pigs, I think there can be penalties, William, of something about 30 or 40 pounds a pig. I mean, that is understood, and that's always been the case. And just even in relation to those southern pigs, they would say, that is there. That's been ongoing long before my time in the sector, but they have long-standing business relationships with those farmers. So it takes a bit of unwangling as to how they might divest or what they might do to change that or whatever within their business model. But you're right, it's there, and farmers will highlight that. The department will highlight there, but it's there, it's at that. But even if we took that out of the equation, even if they were not to take any kill from the south anymore, it doesn't address the problem for the numbers up in the north. If it just in those circumstances, the labour that we have, the shortfall there is that severe.
I fully understand the situation, but pigs killed, one particular factory was charging on a Saturday skilled £52.50 a pig, plus a deduction for overweight pigs. So they were all giving the pigs away.
Oh, completely. It's just one thing after another. It's been, and you think of the feed costs that the farmers have had to endure to put that in there. And then if that's what's happening at the other side, that's a huge impact, because those costs are passed right along to them. So they're, that's why we say it is, you're very right, William. It's a very grave situation for those farmers right now. And all I can say is, when I used to hear a lot from them on the phone, and when you suddenly hear nothing, it just means heads are down, and at the end of themselves, really. In some cases, it's just very worrying when you hear comments coming through with people saying, I went through the last pig dip, I think that was back in '96 or something like that, when the Loveland Christmas factory fire happened, and they invested heavily. Those that remained are the people that are in it for the long haul, and to hear any of them saying, I don't think I can carry on in this, is It's very worrying from a sector which carries all the marks of self-innovation, self-reliance, getting on with doing what we need to do, get the new systems in, adopt anything I bring to them to say, right, lads, we need to do the reduction in the antibiotics in medicine, embrace that fully. And, all of those kinds of things, to hear them say, I don't think I can go on, is very disheartening. It's very, very worrying.
It certainly is, but I'll say this to you. Some farmers feel that processors are taking advantage of the situation too, and getting cheap pork meat from them. So you can understand they feel that way too.
Oh, I can understand how they feel that, but and I'm not defending one side, because I would work the forum has both processor and producers on board, and processors need producers and producers need processors, but there's also on that other side, if those heavy pigs or whatever, they're too big to be boned out, they don't even fit the packaging, if you will, for the supermarkets. And if they have certain codes, even if you go down to it, if you say it's processing further for bacon, for example, they want to see 8 slices or something going in a pack. The eye of that meat is now too big. You're maybe only getting about 4. The meat quality might be as fine, but that's not something they want, and their consumers don't want to see that. And if they do not have the butchery staff to further process that, they take the product and it's just going in bone-in primals and dumped on the European market, where ironically that will just, further depress the price back here in this market, and also catches the eye of the supermarkets as by way of, cheap product, I could get that from there. So you're absolutely right on all fronts.
It is unfortunate that there's a demand for the product, and the farmers are suffering the way they are.
Okay. Thanks, William. And then move on to Rosemary, the last speaker, before we move on to the next set. Rosemary.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. No, Deirdre, thank you for your presentation. That was quite enlightening, quite interesting, Deirdre. But one thing you spoke about, the recruitment issues with regard to bringing people over, and speaking to DAERA and working with the Department of Economy also. Can I ask, has there been, looking at it another way, have the companies gone out? What sort of recruitment exercise have they looked at in relation to going abroad to try and sell the issue regarding bringing in workers into Northern Ireland, into the not to Europe, but even further afield, India, etc., and further afield than that? How much have they tried to encourage workers into Northern Ireland by maybe saying, look, if you're willing to come, we're willing to give you free housing, free English classes, etc.
Thank you, Rosemary. Yeah, no, they would do anything to encourage workers. And it's not really, if it were as simple as them, they are curtailed by the government's immigration policy. Those rules have closed off a lot of that. They will engage through the Tier 2 process, as I mentioned, which gets you beyond that to bring in those workers. So they will engage through their own recruitment agencies and through the proper process. There's a long and complicated process. It costs in the region of something like 1,200 per worker, I think, at one point, to try and sponsor or support to get them through, because they have to be seen to fit the certain criteria, as you would be aware, the English language, the skill, the training, etc. There's a long process to manage all of that to get them to come here. And they do, as I say, they hold accommodation for them. They provide accommodation. I think there are rules saying you must do that. So they have accommodation for them. They hold those, they keep those empty houses because they're not sure if and when do we release those? Do we keep the cost of that going? Are we getting these workers? Are we not sure? But they need to make sure that all of these things are there and in place. So they are more than engaged on that level to do everything that they can. It is a very long and laborious process, and it takes time, to impact. As I said, Carol had some success with that. Just I think there in December, hearing that there will be workers coming, and there's a few more that are anticipated to come on that system through the next couple of 3 months, in smaller amounts, which is good. So on that level, they will engage as far and as effectively. They are approved, to be on those lists, to do whatever they need to do. They are very much on top of that. And I would also want to highlight the level of recruitment that they will do locally, to try and get local workers in here. There's extensive, there's something at one stage they were saying that a company was averaging something on 30,000 per year of a cost to just do recruitment drives here locally within Northern Ireland. That's engagement to schools, that's recruitment drives locally in, various towns or cities, highlighting, publishing, this is what we're doing. When they get them in, that they're offered training, of course, they're offered, good rates of pay, they've upped their rates of pay. They have also offered them, bonuses that if you stay here, so long or whatever, you get this bonus or whatever. There's overtime when that's required, and also recommend a friend. And they also offer them, other incentives, to make you feel part of the system, part of the training they do, all of those other sorts of outings or incentives that can be done, or additional benefits to keep workers here. And the problem we have within Northern Ireland, as you say, we're fishing in a small pool to try and get local workers, because that would be your first port of call before you look, you want to support the local economy. But we're competing against people who are looking for those workers for the poultry sector, for the red meat sector, right across. And sometimes, as I said, the market being what it is and workers, are in high demand, they're moving around, they're leaving one site. If you're up doing a recruitment drive, up on the North Coast, for example, well, you're competing against people that might want to go, or the WD Meats, for example, might want to take, for their factory. So it's just increasing the level of churn, I think, is the way you would put it, even in your efforts to try and recruit locally, which is not good, not what's intended, but you just can't, I think, sit back and do nothing, I think, is their attitude. They just want to do that. So, and there would be very, very high levels of care, for those workers when they come in here, to try and make them feel part of the system, get them, integrated and help them with their transport in and out of work, etc., and all of those things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And just one other thing. When you spoke of the backlog, Deirdre, and yes, I understand. I'm from Fermanagh, South Tyrone, so obviously I'm very aware of what happens in my park, etc. Deirdre, this may be an impossible question for you to answer, but how long, if we did have workers back to their normal level, how long would it take us getting through this backlog?
Oh gosh, that is quite a question. I hadn't thought of that. If you could get them all back, and if you could get them in quickly, well, I don't know. Well, to try and give some kind of appreciation of what that might be, I mentioned that in September, to get my dates right, 2019. No, hang on, 20. Yeah, September 2020, whenever, we were going through the first throes of that year of COVID-19. And when the site at Cranswick up there at Cullibackie had to close for 2 weeks. And it was just their site, so it's just the farmers who were supplying to them that were affected, that suddenly pigs were piling up on farms at that stage. You're waiting for that period to see how long it would take before it would agree, before they would be opened again for, in their 2 weeks. And that was all resolved. It was bad, but gratefully in the end it was resolved, and they were opened in 2 weeks. And then it took a longer, number of weeks, just beyond that, for the Chinese to be happy with everything, and they reinstated them. Thankfully, there are sites in England which they have not reinstated, for companies that went through a similar thing in England. But even dealing with that, so that was what, if they closed in September. And then the backlog that was there, that we were getting back to normal, and bearing in mind we had access to staff then. Do you know what I mean? The staff were still there. This was pre the Brexit thing. So they were trying to keep their staff on board. We were still carrying that backlog of pigs. That took a good 8, 9, 10 months to really get the system flowing the way it would again. So it's challenging, you know, to take up that if you have a shortage, depending on the number, if you get them in, it takes time for all of these things to filter through. So to just, you know, it's a hard question to answer, but I just want to hope that maybe gives you some appreciation that even working, and that's working with additional kills at a weekend, to give you an idea of what it does. The industry will right itself, it will do its best, you know, to get into that, but that was even with additional Saturday kills to deal with the backlog on top of what was normal kills coming through. So there's two tiers of trying to move everything along, as it were, and get back to some normal process. It's shocking really how quickly things can back up.
Go out of control, Thank you, Deirdre. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're Rosemary. Okay, Deirdre, well, thank you very much for the briefing this morning and for taking our questions and for providing answers. And please be assured that we'll do everything in our whatever spheres of influence we might have, we will do our best to try and help redress the situation. So thank you, Deirdre, and have a nice day. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and members. I very much appreciate that. Appreciate your time. Thank you now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay, members, we're going to move on now to item number 6 on the agenda, and that's an oral briefing from Renewable NI on a green economy. Page 74 of your pack. Papers related to today's briefing from Renewable NI, including a copy of the report on powering a green economy. The following representatives of Renewable NI with us today: Stephen Agnew, head of Renewable NI and no stranger to this place, and Rachel Anderson, Renewable NI, and Russell Smith, KPMG Ireland. So I'd like to welcome you to committee this morning, and I want to apologise at the outset for having to defer last week's briefing on such short notice. And you'll know yourself, Stephen, from your previous experience here, that there's the capacity for committee meetings to deviate from the best laid plans as far as indicative timings are concerned. So I want to thank you for providing the report, and I'd like to ask you to proceed with your opening remarks and your briefing, and then we'll have questions from members after that, okay?
Thank you, Chair. No, delighted to be back, albeit it'd be nice to come back in person at some stage again, but I'm sure I'll get that opportunity in the future, political stability permitting. But look, I'm going to hand over to Russell to give a bit of an overview of the PAGE report, Powering the Green Economy report, and just to go through some of the key findings before opening it to members for questions, if that's okay. So I'll hand over now to Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to provide a short overview of some of the key findings from a report. So KPMG Ireland was commissioned to quantify the impact of onshore wind in Northern Ireland currently and over the coming decade. The onshore wind sector, of course, has been, one of the big success stories for Northern Ireland. It, has achieved a lot of record sort of achievements that stand out well, even on a global stage. Going forward, the decarbonisation agenda, the climate agenda, means that electrification is going to be an important component of that decarbonisation journey. The electrification of heating, the electrification of vehicles, and the need to provide ongoing growth in the renewable energy generation in Northern Ireland. To set the context, Northern Ireland currently has 1,400 megawatts of onshore wind capacity. That is around 35 wind farms and around 700 single turbines across the country. That is producing just under 50% of our electricity in the country from renewable source, coupled with a little bit from solar and some other technologies. Going forward, to achieve the ambition set out in the recently published energy strategy for Northern Ireland, the country needs to increase the amount of onshore wind and other renewable sources. And we'd estimate that is around another 1,100 megawatts, so just under doubling what is currently being deployed over sort of the last 15 or so years. That's equivalent to probably adding another 2 to 3 wind farms per year between now and 2030 to achieve that target. So we analysed what is the impact and the benefits of this sector to the country. We did this through a very comprehensive method. So rather than just high-level estimates, this was directly speaking with and questionnaires to the individual participants in the sector, understanding how many employees they have, how much they pay their employees, etc. So Northern Ireland's onshore wind sector currently produces on an annual basis what we call an operational GVA, or gross value add, of 80 million a year. So every year it's adding around 80 million into the economy. As the sector starts to redeploy assets, and you have to remember, due to a lack of subsidies or route to market, there hasn't really been any new wind farms added over the last 3 years. But that's going to change going forward, and it has to change. And if we do start adding new incremental wind farms, we would estimate that by 2030, the sector will be contributing around 145 million a year into the local economy from operational positions, and another 220 million a year from a construction perspective. In total, between now and 2030, the sector will add around 3.1 billion to the Northern Ireland economy. So that is a significant engine of growth for the Northern Ireland economy. It currently employs around 600 individuals, and that would grow to around 1,350 by 2030. That's around 63 million of salaries alone that would be coming into the economy. The sector currently contributes around 15 million per year in rates to the local councils, and that will grow to around 25 million per year. And there's community benefits, and this is money distributed to local causes in and around the assets, and that's around 2.4 million a year distributed, and that will grow to around 4.2 million. So that's a very substantial number, a very important sector to the economy. The final piece I would add, as part of the decarbonisation journey, we need more than just new wind farms. We also need supporting infrastructure. And separately, in a report we undertook for Northern Ireland Electricity, we quantified that on top of the around 2 billion that's going to be spent on renewable assets, there's another 2.2 billion that will need to be spent on grid upgrades, EV charging infrastructure, energy efficiency in homes. So in total, the electrification journey, of which renewables is a large part, will generate around 4.2 billion of new investment over the next decade, and that will simulate about 8.7 billion of benefit to the Northern Ireland economy. So a lot of stats there, a lot of numbers. Hopefully you're able to follow those, but happy to take some questions if you have any.
And Chair, just one final point, if it's okay, before opening up the questions, is one thing that's puts this to some extent at risk. One of the key barriers for our sector is the lengthy planning timelines, and we've seen the Audit Office report land this week, and indeed the Minister's own report on the review of the Planning Act last week. One of the key blockages for us, and most relevant to this committee, is the lack of resourcing of NIEA as a statutory consultee. I provided some figures to the committee. Statutory consultees are supposed to respond within 21 days. Typically in wind farm applications, we're waiting 11 to 12 months on that response. And as we understand it, it's because there's one person in Northern Ireland who looks at every wind application. It's a significant barrier, and Russell's just highlighted the potential of this sector. But as certainly, Rachel can attest to, when you're a developer and you can operate across the UK, anywhere across the UK or Ireland, Northern Ireland is looking increasingly less attractive because of those planning issues. But I'll leave it there and welcome members' questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. We have a number of members who want to ask questions. I suppose one of the things that I want to kick off with, it's just in relation to the grid. Is the grid here capable of actually carrying all of the energy that is produced by the turbines? And I know that, and I suppose it's a related question, down here in the west part of Tyrone where we live, there has been quite a proliferation of wind turbine farms, and whilst I understand that it contributes towards renewable energy, they're not always welcomed by the local community. Well, first of all, is the grid capable of carrying all of the power that's generated? And And as a city, there is a very high proliferation down here, and also we've seen what happened down in the Mean Bog with the landslide there as well. So there are a lot of localised issues related to wind farms as well. How would you propose to deal with those?
Okay, I'll maybe make a couple of points and bring Rachel in to give a developer's perspective, if that's okay. I mean, firstly, on to use your term, the proliferation in certain areas. Look, for me, still the biggest issue facing humanity today is climate change, and I think we need to keep some of the challenges in perspective of siting new wind farms. Given that context, our members will typically site their wind farms where the wind blows, where grid connection, etc., is available. I currently sit in Bangor, County Down. No one's looking to develop wind farms here because it's not the right place to do so. One thing, as Russell highlighted, the rates income for local communities as well as the community benefits for those who do host wind farms are significant. And I was given a presentation to Fermanagh and Omagh councillors last night. I think it's off the top of my head, it's over £2 million in rates for Fermanagh and Omagh council, and that'll more than double by 2030 if we meet our targets. On grid, we can't build out all this new generation without building out the grid. And Sony published last year Shaping Our Electricity Future Roadmap, which shows the upgrading grids, and those things do need to happen in tandem, new generation with new grid development. But I'll maybe pass over to Rachel at this point to maybe give a developer's perspective on the difficulties of getting grid and the importance to them as developers.
Thanks, Stephen. So in addition, just for the record, in addition to my role as the chair of Renewable NI, I also work for RES, who is a developer based in Northern Ireland. I suppose just picking up on Stephen's points about the grid, it is difficult to get a grid connection in Northern Ireland, and that is something that we need to think about and ensure that there is sufficient funding to make sure that we can connect projects to the grid. I think what's clear is our future is electrification. That is the direction of travel to make sure that we are meeting our decarbonisation targets. So we are going to have to sort of tackle the grid issue to enable not just electrification in the power sector, but also when we're thinking about heat and transport as well. It's that whole system thinking. Perhaps moving on to the points, Chair, that you made around proliferation of wind farms and communities. I think that, as somebody who's lived in Fermanagh and in Tyrone for a long period of time, I am aware that, some of those landscapes, we do see lots of turbines in them. It is because we have, a fantastic wind resource in Northern Ireland, and we are able to harness that. There is opportunities for farmers in terms of rural diversification, in terms of land rentals when they're working with large-scale developers, like the company that I work for and also our other members, but also for farmers to diversify themselves and put their own turbines or solar panels up and things like that. I think it's important to say that, with every wind farm or wind turbine that is developed, there is a process that goes through to ensure that those wind farms are sensitively sited, that we're making really clear what the landscape and visual assessment needs to be and how we assess those projects, but also trying to bring communities with us as well. So there's a lot of benefits from renewables in terms of local jobs. I know, in OMA we have, a number of civil engineering companies that have, really had the mainstay of their business has been through renewables, and that's enabled them to grow and to export their services as well. But it is a journey, and we do need to continue moving along that together to make sure that we are, able to deploy more wind farms, but in a way that, is sensitive to local communities and local landscapes and local needs.
And tell me, has there been any, I know we talk a lot about onshore, has there been any consideration given to harnessing some of the offshore opportunities?
Yeah, I mean that's something our members are very much engaged in, but I suppose worth understanding the timeline for offshore is significantly longer, between sort of 8 to 10 years from conception to connection. Northern Ireland's sort of lagged a bit in terms of its consenting regime, but we are working with the Department for Economy to get that in place. I suppose the next challenge for us is to get Northern Ireland included in future Crown Estate leasing rounds. The Crown Estate owns the seabed, and we can't put turbines in the water without their consent to do so. At the minute, Northern Ireland hasn't been included in recent leasing rounds because they feel the consenting regime isn't up to scratch yet, and due to the lack of access to a support scheme. So Northern Ireland projects can neither access the UK CFD or the Irish RES scheme. So we're the only part of these islands without a support scheme, albeit there's a commitment in the energy strategy to change that. But there's a number of things need to happen, and the likelihood is we won't see turbines in the water until 2030 or beyond. So when we have a 70% target from the energy strategy, that's effectively an onshore target. Anything that offshore delivers will be in addition to that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move around the room. William?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, William.
Got the eye? Got an eye?
Yeah, we have you, William, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And can I thank our friends for bringing the presentation. For me, renewable energy and wind is the cleanest renewable energy that one can get. It's there, it's free. My experience has been grid connections can be outlandish. Planning issues in general. Council planners are quite nervous of wind turbines, and of course, while everyone wants renewable energy, they don't want turbines near them. So there is difficulties in that. Do you think that there needs to be a fresh look at planning policy if you're going to achieve 70%? I mean, it means the doubling of wind farms, I think you said. So that's a big ask on the present planning policy in my eyes. Do you think that there needs to be a fresh look at plan policy if we're to deliver on this?
I think the big concern for us is local development plans that are being proposed by councils. Some of them are quite regressive in terms of wind development in particular. So I always cite Mid and East Antrim as an example where they propose to introduce areas of constraint on high structures. It's a very thinly veiled way of saying in these areas we don't want wind turbines. And Rachel's company RES mapped out the existing restrictions and proposed new restrictions in policy. And if it was to go ahead, 0.3% of the council area would be available for wind farm development. Now that's in effect a presumption against renewables when strategic policy sort of states there should be a presumption in favour. So I think there's definitely something around the hierarchy of planning, and I think there's still a bit of working out to do. What does regional policy mean if local councils decide to go in the opposite direction? And we're seeing LDPs now begin to go through independent examination, and we're hoping that the PAC will say, look, if you're directly contradicting regional policy, that is not sound. The LDP should sit within wider policy, not directly contradict it. But I don't know, Rachel or Russell, if you've anything to add to that.
I'm happy to add something there, Stephen. I think when we talk about, I think it's a really great question and really, interesting to think about the role of planning in meeting targets and what needs to happen. From a kind of developer investor point of view, we think of kind of locational signals. So there's locational signals around grid, around market, but planning is often a key locational signal. And that's not to say that, projects should, be kind of ride roughshod and get sort of consented every single time. But people want to see a progressive planning regime. They want to see a regime that they see, local plans, like the local development plan Stephen talked about, reflect overall kind of executive level ambition in terms of the energy strategy and future direction. And at the moment, there is a bit of a gap that we need to fill between what is, being set at a very high level in terms of our climate ambitions, our green growth, our energy strategy, and how do we make sure those come down to local authorities and are then enacted in those local plans, so people can, start working with them and start making, really great decisions on that basis.
Okay.
I would maybe just add one additional point. As part of our research, we did ask all the members and developers of their pipeline of future projects, and certainly it is clear that members do have visibility of sufficient locations across Northern Ireland that they're comfortable, are suitable for the deployment of new wind farms, and that's just so long as planning policy, doesn't then start changing or going against that. But Northern Ireland does have sufficient locations that are capable of building out this additional capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Tom? Tom?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. And I would re-echo what the Chair has said earlier about the amount of wind farms that we have here already in West Tyrone. Now, some people will look on wind farms and they'll say they're a beauty. Other people will look on wind farms and they'll say they're a blight on our landscape, and that's I suppose the balance that we have to try and to overcome. But according to your figures, then by 2030, you'll be looking at maybe building another 20 wind farms. If you're doing 2 or 3 you need to be building this for the next 2 to 3 every year for up to 2030. So we're talking somewhere perhaps around 20 wind farms. I no doubt at this stage you have a roadmap done for that, and you've identified sites or locations where these wind farms may well be a suitable site for them. So can you give us any indication as to where you have seen suitable sites that may well be, available for further wind farm development to be able to build out what you're talking about? The other issue is, and I know you've talked about the amount of money that's going into the economy through rates and through employment and all of that, but look, at the end of the day, there's still an extra cost going on to the consumer, because the cost of electricity has gone up and is continuing to go up. And rightly or wrongly, there's a perception here that this is going up to help pay for the development of wind farms, all of this type of thing. So, is this the development of further wind farms, is that going to continue to put the price of electricity up, that is going to be again coming back on the consumer, and that they're going to be, or the people on the ground, that they're going to be continuing to pay for this for the development of renewable energy, and that is a concern. What we need to see, the more renewable, the more wind farms we have, the more megawatts that's being provided, then what we should be seeing is actually the price of electricity coming down rather than continually to increase. So if you could sort of address those two issues.
Yeah, and really keen to address it, because you raised an important point. Energy bills are going up at present. It's obviously hitting people in the pocket, and is a difficulty particularly for those the most vulnerable and those in fuel poverty. The reality is renewable electricity is the wind and solar is the cheapest new electricity you can put on the system. It's been gas that has driven the price of electricity up, and numerous reports show that renewables have a downward pressure on price. So, for example, NIE produced a report, Networks for Net Zero, and they estimate that achieving 70% renewables will reduce consumer bills by 1%. another report that we published by Baringa called Achieving Zero showed that going from 70 to 80% would save consumers in Northern Ireland an additional £50 million. So for the reason I think Mr. Irwin outlined in terms of the wind is a free fuel essentially, because we have a zero marginal cost in terms of fuel, we depress the wholesale price. The more higher renewable penetration we move to, the less we rely on gas, the more renewables can bring prices down in comparison to what they are with gas on the system. And I think the real benefits will be seen when we can move to a fully zero carbon system. For as long as we rely on gas, we are at the mercy of international markets. Obviously we stand as a solution to that as part of the solution to high energy prices, as well as reliance on foreign fossil fuels. So I think it's an important point, and I appreciate the opportunity to address it. Maybe bring Russell in, just if he wants to give an economist perspective, he can maybe give some of the detail behind that better than I can. But just on your point about where the wind farms will be sited here to 2030. I'm happy, we do a pipeline survey every year. I'm happy to share that summary with the members. It shows you sort of how many megawatts are in the planning system in each area. So I'll circulate that to the committee. But Russell, do you want to speak further on electricity price?
Yeah, just echo your points there. I think there's a misconception that renewable energy, adds to consumer costs. As Stephen said, the current spike in pricing is almost wholly related to wholesale markets and cost of gas and disruption in those energy markets. It's certainly not to do with Northern Ireland's investment in renewables. One statistic we calculated for a report last year, single wind turbines across Northern Ireland, of which there's 700, so they're the smaller single turbines, they cost the average consumer over their 20-year life 1 penny. So the cost of one turbine per consumer over 20 years is 1 penny, so 1/20th of a penny per year. So the cost of renewables is not a significant cost, and certainly I think there is misconceptions on that.
Okay. Can I sorry, Chair, just to come back on that, can you give us any indication as to what renewables is actually costing the consumer?
Stephen, do you want to answer that?
I don't have the figures off the top of my head. I mean, we did do a study, the wind dividend, which sort of looked back. We various reports looking forward, but the wind dividend looked back at the cost of renewables over the past 20 years. They did conclude that net, so including the investment and the subsidy support that was in place then, that overall renewables reduced the wholesale price, but I don't have the exact figures to hand. But again, I can share that report with the committee.
That'll be grand. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen and Thomas. Patsy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And just picking up on that, good to see Stephen again there. It's been a while, Stephen, since those heady days on the Economy Committee. And just one thing does spring to my mind is that had we gone ahead with the proposal from Minister Jonathan Bell at the time, in the transition from ROCs over, Northern Ireland electricity consumers would have been faced with huge increases to their bills. So just put that one down for a marker. And there were difficulties at the committee about the evidence being provided by officials contradicting what was actual fact. But anyway, there's one thing that just in regard to renewables, and look, I enjoy my landscapes as much as anyone else, and I can see where the mislocation of some of these turbines can really bespoil a landscape. So planning and sensitive planning is crucial to this. But there is just one thing, and that's the efficiency of wind. Now, and you'll know where I'm coming to, and that is you can see those wind turbines turning and they're feeding into the grid and everything's going grand, but there are other times they have to be switched off. And the question is storage. There could be high winds blowing, and yet we will all know that there are turbines just turned off simply because there's no methodology of storing all that energy that is potentially there and keeping it so that it can be used at a later date. Tell me, I'm saying this out of absolute ignorance, is there any advance on the science around storage of that huge amount of energy that is there potentially for exploration, for utilization?
I suppose the short answer is yes. We have battery storage projects on the system now, and plenty in the pipeline coming on the system. We've had a bit of a planning wrangle, let's say, that's stalled the market, but hopefully there's been a court case and a judgment and a ruling on that, and hopefully we can progress the projects that are currently in the planning system. But Rachel, maybe do you want to speak from a development perspective about storage and green hydrogen, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Green, it was a really, really interesting question, because, we do have to talk more about, what do we do to manage our variable resources, and things like wind and is great for how do we couple that, and so we've got energy storage that we can do. There's lots that have been done in terms of batteries, and that market is really moving on. But something that's really interesting that we need to start capitalising on, and I think Northern Ireland is in a really fantastic position to do that, is green hydrogen. So how do we utilise green hydrogen? And I know we've got the project with TransLink, so the Belfast bus is there, and we're already kind of looking at that. But how do you also think about how do we think about some of our industries as well that we can help decarbonise with hydrogen? How do we couple that with renewables as well? So that's a really interesting space, and one that I think Northern Ireland can really establish itself as a world leader in.
But how? That's my question. That's what I'm trying to find out. It's great as a concept, but I'm thinking as to how does that enhance the efficiency of those turbines that on a very windy day are sitting not moving? That's the point. And now hydrogen is an interesting one, because I've been reading something about blue hydrogen and the implications of that with carbon and stuff. So there's interesting argument there, but I don't want to get diverted off onto that. Whenever this is still in my head, there's considerable investment going in there. There've been jobs created, surely, but it's to enhance and improve the efficiency of those turbines and the consequential impact of the grid being unable to take huge potential of energy at a time whenever it's at its maximum generation.
I think, Russell, you're looking to come in. Do you want to maybe cover dispatch down if you weren't already intending to?
Yeah, so look, effectively we have periods, as you point out, that there is surplus electricity, and what we need to do is find a use for that surplus electricity instead of turning off the turbines. Yes. And so the opportunity for green hydrogen is effectively to convert that electricity into green hydrogen, which then turns that energy into a form which can be better and more easily stored. So, there's technology which is effectively electrolyzers, where you electrolyze water and it produces green hydrogen. So you're turning electricity into a gaseous form, and that gas then holds the energy, and you can store that gas and use it when required.
Yeah, that's one thing, but my point being is, at a time whenever fuel costs are huge and are growing and getting even worse, I'm looking at a situation where the potential to generate much more electricity that is literally in the atmosphere around us for potential generation, and that people who are barely able to heat their homes, and increasingly so, the estimates of fuel poverty by the end of this year are surging. So how do we get from the point where there's a solution there, in theory, but the capacity to deliver that solution, there's massive amounts of potential for electricity to be generated, massive amounts. But how do we get from point A to point B and solve that conundrum, because of this surplus of energy available, yet it can't be delivered to the consumer at a lesser price? That bit fascinates me, because we have a potential for a solution. Are you saying we just don't have the technology to deliver it yet?
I think the report we did, Achieving Zero, looks at getting to a really zero carbon power system, and it concludes that all the technologies are now known to us today that we need to get there. So we have the technology. I suppose we have the barriers of the planning system and whatever to get these things developed, but the knowledge is there. It's just the time now to make those investments, to get it on the system, to store either in green hydrogen or battery storage, as ways of using the wind. Because what we have sometimes is, as you allude to, times when we're producing more renewables than actually we need. Often the wind blows best at night when we're not using electricity. Another way we can solve that as well is demand management. So when demand side management, when we move, for example, to more electric vehicles, we can be asking people, and indeed incentivize people to charge their electric vehicles overnight, when usually the demand for electricity is low but the supply is high. We can start to balance out that demand and supply. And just one other point that I'd maybe make on your point about getting cheap electricity to homeowners. Something our members are engaged in is a project called Energy Cloud that's trying to find a way of essentially diverting electricity when it would otherwise not be used, and providing it for free to low income households. Yes. So to heat a boiler or to put on the immersion at times when there is excess wind. So we are looking at ways, as well as how we can as an industry support those in fuel poverty.
So it's sort of a project in the offing at the minute.
Yeah, it's in development. It's really, as the architect of it often says, we have the wind developers on one side happy to give the electricity. We have the consumers happy to receive it. We just need the people in the middle to sort out how we make that happen in a way that nobody's charged or losing money. Yes. So we're working with the housing executive as part of that. I'm one of the directors of the project, and as I say, a number of our members are engaged in it. So it's something we are looking at, because at the minute it is. The electricity is not literally wasted, but it's potential electricity that could be being produced that's not being used. And if there's vulnerable consumers who can benefit, we're happy to assist in that.
That's great. Thanks very much, Stephen, and good to see you again, and all the best in it's not your new job now, but all the best in your job.
No, thank you. Good to see you again. I do miss the days in the committee, although it's been nice to do a real deep dive in energy, so benefits of stepping out. So good to see you. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Okay, Rosemary?
Thank you. Good, Stephen. Good to see you, and thank you everybody else for your presentation. Stephen will be aware of my Fermanagh connections, and basically I live in Fermanagh. But I want to sort of follow on from both Tom and Patsy. I live in an area, I can view these wind turbines from my own home, and quite often they're not turning. It's windy, they're not turning. And we've talked about storage, etc. Is the problem, and I ask it, not the upgrading of the grid? Has that not to receive priority treatment? I know you're from renewable energy, obviously, but I know, for example, a number of farmers who wanted to diversify and have their own wind turbines, and the amount to get onto the grid, it was just like numbers plucked out of a hat with zeros added. It was financially impossible. Once they'd got their plan permission, it was actually financially impossible for them to put up the money to get onto the grid. So I think there needs to be a lot more work done in relation to upgrading the grid, allowing those people that have the plan permission to try and get onto the grid. And as I say, I can stand outside my own home, look up at wind turbines. They're not turning. Our electricity is soaring, the price of it's soaring, and yet I'm watching the possibility of making electricity being lost. And one other thing, Stephen, you said, I think it was you, Stephen, said 70% renewable energy would reduce our electricity bills by 1%. Stephen, with all due respect, 1% is not a great deal when you consider electricity is going up at 3, 4, 20%, 30% hikes all the time. 1% is not a great deal. And I'm wondering about that also.
Yeah, I suppose I should say that report was done before we seen the spike in energy prices, but I suppose it's making the point that yes, investment is needed in the grid. That's the main kind of expense for the consumer in bringing on more renewables, but actually because of the price that, you know, because of the downward pressure on wholesale price, that even as we're making those new investments in grid, the consumer is still saving money because we're essentially paying as you save. So it's compared to what would be the case if we didn't have renewables. And as I say, I think we'll realise the real savings when we start to move gas off the system, or I should say fossil gas off the system entirely, because I imagine we'll need green hydrogen as part of the system going forward. On your point about grid, and look, this came up multiple times yesterday evening when I was in front of Fermanagh and Omagh councillors. You know, there is a roadmap by Sony to invest in the grid, but something else on the cost is Northern Ireland is set apart from GB in that we charge the full cost to the person seeking to connect, whereas in Great Britain some of that cost is socialised. And again, Rachel maybe can talk to the difference that makes as a developer. So there is an ONIE are calling for a review of that, because it could potentially certainly hinder, if not stop, the emergence of you know, the increase of electric charging points. And because of the extent, that's one of the reasons why we've the probably the worst electric charging system in these islands is the cost to connect those charging points. So you know, it's something that needs to be addressed. The NIE have written and produced a paper sent to the utility regulator to review the policy on connection charging. But Rachel, do you maybe want to talk about your perspective as a developer, how NI differs to GB in that regard?
I think that probably comes back to those locational signals again, of how do we make sure in Northern Ireland that we have strong locational signals, and ensuring that we have appropriately costed grid connections, and also grid availability as well is key for anybody looking to invest. And you know, at the moment, as a developer, if you're based across, you know, these islands, you have a choice where to put your investment, whether you put that in GB, whether you put that in the south, or you put it in Northern Ireland. And we want to make sure that Northern Ireland remains the most attractive place. So all those great kind of facts and figures there that Russell talked about the economic opportunity, can be realised in Northern Ireland.
Okay. Just one other question, and it's slightly different to the rest. I live in a community that has benefited from the local wind farms, or wind farm. When the figures that you're discussing, that have you spoke about previously, 15 million, etc., you know, are these benefits? Are you sure that these benefits are? Could they not be increased? Shall we put it like that? You know, yes, there's a certain amount of benefits and it's put back into the community, but given the amount of money that seems to be made in relation to these wind farms, is it not possible to increase those benefits, have a look at them, and perhaps be even more generous to the local community?
Yeah, maybe bring Russell and or Rachel in. But one thing I would say in that, you know, in the energy strategy consultation, one of the questions was around community benefit, and we did, as a membership body, we could simply say, no, leave it to us, we'll work it out for ourselves. But we did support the Scottish model, where there's guidance on the levels of community benefit that should be provided, you know, so that essentially there's a strong kind of signal to all developers to provide a good support within the communities that host them. But I mean, so the fact that our members were supportive of that, I think it shows we do want to contribute to local communities. We want, you know, both for, I suppose, altruistic and maybe even self-interest, you know, we want communities to have a good association with our industry, because one, they won't let us back if we don't, and two, because we actually, people in this industry care about community, care about climate change, they care about the impacts they're having, so we want to get it right, and that's why, as I say, we're actually arguing that government should be putting more in place to encourage community benefit, rather than, often industries are saying government should stay out of it to some extent. We want government's involvement. We want that partnership. But again, Rachel, do you maybe want to speak from a local developer perspective, and maybe Russell about the level of investment that's in communities, perhaps?
Can I just come in there 1 minute, Stephen? Yeah, you're right about the support from the community, but the problem is what the community benefited. It was the amount of money that was set towards community benefits was set maybe 15 years ago. That has not increased. And this is where I'm coming from in relation to it doesn't increase year on year, as we know. As we know, prices, etc., have increased year on year. And Stephen, believe it or not, there is a wind farm. I know of at least one wind farm in Fermanagh, South Tyrone, where the community benefit nothing from. There was no arrangement. It was before those community benefits actually came in.
Yeah, no, I think the industry has improved its record in that regard. I think the earlier wind farms were also more expensive and riskier from a developer's perspective. The technology costs have come down significantly, and I think the investment is more certain. But again, maybe Rachel could certainly speak to that better than I could. So bring in Rachel.
Thanks. Thank
Sure.
you.
So I suppose perhaps thinking about those sort of community benefits when we're talking about community fund or local electricity discounts to the communities surrounding a wind farm. I think, across Northern Ireland we have a protocol that the large scale commercial developers do participate in. But as Stephen says, as an industry, I think, let's look and see what we can do to have some more guidance about how does that sort of bring a more level playing field into that, and make sure that both communities and developers are all, happy with how community benefits should, flow from renewable developments and all forms of renewable developments to the local communities that host them. I think when we also talk about benefits, we need to also kind of think about what are the other benefits that local communities get from having renewables in their area. And rates is, a really key thing that we contribute to, and I think some councils, I want to say it's from our own district council, 10% of their rates income come from renewable projects, and as we put more and more renewables onto the system, those rates are only going to increase, and they do play a key role in local councils, particularly when budgets are tight as well. Then perhaps if we move on to other forms of benefits, well, I think that's jobs is a really key one, and ensuring that there's good rural jobs for local people as well. And wind farms do really manage to do that. A lot of projects that are built, the vast majority of the spend on those projects happens within that local area in Northern Ireland. And that's really key because it enables business to grow, enables us to build a really well thought out and developed supply chain in Northern Ireland as well. And it's everybody from fencing companies to quarries to people that are doing the civil engineering as well on those projects. So there is a supply chain, and I actually think it's really beneficial that we continue to grow that and continue to work in local communities to bring those benefits forward too.
Yeah, Rachel, I don't disagree with you there, but the area I'm living in, the wind farm has been up and running 15 years, and really there's nobody local employed in it. So that's what I'm saying. Yes, the benefits were at the very beginning. I totally agree with you. But since that wind farm has been up and running, there's very little local benefit in relation to jobs.
Typically, an operational wind farm, would only employ 1 to 2 people. But we are seeing, hubs. So we, have, there might be manufacturers or service providers that have hubs, and there might be a few local people that are near one project, and they also work on other projects. So I think we do have to acknowledge that at an operational level, there isn't the same level of employment as during construction, but that tends to be the case across most infrastructure type projects. But there is still, how do we make sure that those service jobs, those operational wind farms, that we are ensuring that there's good provision for jobs for people in Northern Ireland to fulfil those. And I think that's something as an industry that we continue to work on.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. Claire?
Thanks, Chair. And hi, Stephen. I can see you. You can't see me, but
Likewise, very good to see you.
It's been quite a while. And yourself, Rachel. We've met before as well. So, hi, yeah. And Russell, hi. We haven't met, but I've read some of your work. It's so good to have you here. But listen, I'm thinking, obviously, the work that you guys do and the sector that you're in crosses many different departments, and we're talking about planning, we're talking about the grid, that's all in infrastructure, we're talking about energy itself, and that sits within economy. So I'm thinking, for the purposes of our committee, then we would have environment and rural affairs. So it was good to hear Rosemary's conversation with you there about the community paybacks and the community benefits, and I think that's a really important one. It's great to see that starting to be rolled out. But I suppose I'm thinking of the onshore wind or versus offshore as well, and thinking it was said at the start there that obviously seabed consents would be a big problem here in trying to establish any offshore wind farms. But in terms of environmental impacts or working with the department, maybe with the Environment Agency specifically, have there been any sort of good or bad experiences there, and even in terms of the environmental impacts? And I know it's going to be how long's a bit of a string maybe, but if you could give us a wee sense of the impacts of siting the turbines versus the payback that we get from them.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of offshore, I think that's what we need to get in place is a robust consenting regime, both from the Crown Estate, DAERA, in terms of DAERA will handle any planning for offshore wind. It doesn't go through the normal planning system. And then one of the things we're waiting on from the Department for Economy is a strategic environmental assessment. One was done in 2012 of Northern Ireland's total coastline, with sort of the development of renewable electricity in mind. But I think everyone's agreed that that's now out of date and needs to be updated. So Department for Economy have started working that, but it's likely to take 18 months for that to complete. In terms of the experience maybe in Great Britain, Rachel, is there anything there that you can talk to in terms of offshore development and environmental protection sort of being done in line with that?
Obviously, we've seen, the offshore industry has done exceptionally well in GB, and definitely I think there's areas there that we can look at, but also look to the south as well as they start to develop that market. And it's definitely a requirement, I think, if we want to ensure that we can bring forward offshore in Northern Ireland, that we have a look and make sure that we are considering what the best approach is and drawing on people that have had the experience before us, so we are ready to ensure that we're deploying by 2030.
Just to add to that, Stephen, offshore, I think absolutely, and diversification of generation is important. Onshore is a big part of the answer, but it has to be, part of an overall piece. If you look to the Republic of Ireland, they are ahead of us in their legislative targets and in enabling. Already, the Republic of Ireland has 70 offshore wind projects under development in its coastal waters. The government recently came out with its updated ambition, which is an 80% target for renewable electricity. We're looking to deploy another around 1 gigawatt of onshore wind. They've put a target of a further 4 gigawatt of onshore wind by 2030. On top of that, they've also put a target of 5 gigawatts of offshore wind plus 2 gigawatts of solar. So, the Republic of Ireland is ploughing ahead very significantly with the deployment and across all of those three core technologies. And we do need to make sure that we're not left behind. We have a really, really strong foundation of renewables that were deployed over the last decade. We have somewhat stalled, though, over recent years, and we need to pick up that again so we don't actually lose the leadership position that we had created.
Yeah, listen, I couldn't agree more as well. And the longer we leave it, obviously, the more urgent that it gets. And the more urgent that it gets, the wider the proliferation when we do start moving, I suppose. And I think it's in that context I was trying to ask the questions as well. And we were, again, listening to the conversation throughout your time. But there's, about, that resistance that people would have, or those myths that are out there in terms of the cost of it, or it's, it's we've got it wrong. I mean, and that community payback or the community engagement is really, really key. So siting them onshore or offshore also has a different sort of reaction, I suppose, from people. And it's great that Rosemary's here, getting those from Anna South Tyrone, getting the payback. I live in a more urban area, but where I am, a lot of the houses here would have huge electricity pylons in their back gardens, and their tiny wee back gardens, so there's no consensus, it's not a Marmite thing, everybody hates them, whereas with turbine, you love them or you don't, but it's when we cite these, so if it would be the farm proposed up in the Spurn Mountains, for example, there was resistance from the community. There's a job of work to be done to get, public buy-in to what's needed. And I think that's the big one. So I think that we'll have a faulty system, through planning or working together or cross-departmental and a load of other things going on as well. A lot of misinformation maybe that's still continually out there too, but what we do have is a huge and urgent need to become much more self-reliant, and it is a huge economic driver and something that we need to get the buy-in for, because every time a planning application comes up for one, people are going to resist and put objections in. And I think it's our role a lot of the time as the politicians, and the community representatives, to be able to have those conversations. So that's where we're
No, absolutely. A number of good points there. And certainly on the point of infrastructure, I think it's a conversation. I know Sony, for example, are looking at how they can improve their community engagement when they're developing infrastructure, but it does require the utility regulator to allow them to fund whether it be community engagement or indeed in the same way our members do provide community benefit schemes when they're siting pylons in communities. But the utility regulator, because it's a regulated industry, any costs will go on to consumer bills, and our utility regulator, rightly or wrongly, is very adverse to releasing fund for that type of work. So I think that's a discussion that's taken place. Maybe argument was the right term, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'll maybe make a political point, unusually for me these days, around your point about community engagement. We absolutely want to engage with communities, but we do also need leadership from political parties. So, we do see it on one hand, parties calling the climate emergency in the Assembly, yet their councillors objecting to virtually every wind farm application. And, I'm certainly doing work, as I say. I was in front of Fermanagh and Omagh Council yesterday evening to try to get across the message that, look, we are, a key part of the solution to climate change. We will invest in your community. We will offer support. We want to leave a positive aspect, but we need to put into perspective some of the issues that people have with wind farms. Maybe being a bit too candid here, but I find it hard to balance the threat to future life in this planet with some people. I just don't like them. I don't think that's enough. I think we need real evidence-based reasons not to site a wind farm. If those don't exist, then I think planning should go ahead, but it needs to be evidence-based rather than this kind of like or dislike. It's a wee bit like the climate change, I believe or don't believe in it. We need evidence, and we need to go forward on that basis.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to cut on there, but we're kind of running over our time slot. Our next stakeholders there. So Harry, you've indicated you want to speak. Can I just ask that we all be brief from here on in, so we don't keep our next group waiting? Thank you.
And thank you very much, Philip. Much appreciated. And Stephen, Russell, and Rachel, good to see you. And Stephen, I never did have a chance to work with you in this present job. And Rachel, I must say, for Fermanagh girl, you have a slightly different accent to our Rosemary. But with all that said, I'll tell you what I would like to ask you, Stephen, probably. We'll bring it down to purchases. Now, we're thinking of pushing these schemes getting a lot more turbines. And I'm just thinking, I know a lot of the ones that we would have had at present would have been purchased from foreign fields, could we say. But just knowing the capabilities we have, especially up around that Oma area, for manufacturing steelworks, the tubes, and even as far as building the generators, would that be something we could explore and maybe push going forward, that a lot of the manufacturing could possibly take place here? Have we had any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a brief point. We've talked a bit about offshore, and we're in the process of commissioning a report to look at supply chain to make sure that when those projects are being developed, where possible, the likes of Belfast Harbour, Harland and Wolff, we can really maximise the infrastructure that we already have here. But I'll maybe hand over to Russell, around that point on investment and how we keep as much as we can in the local economy.
Yeah, we've actually, KPMG has recently been engaged by Invest Northern Ireland to undertake a study effectively looking at the opportunities for local Northern Ireland companies, be it manufacturing or other, to get involved in the green infrastructure revolution. So effectively, we're looking at trying to map the capabilities that we have across the Northern Ireland corporates and how they align with the global needs of, wind turbine manufacturers, heat pump manufacturers, etc. So that is certainly on the radar, and we are seeing very strong overlap in the capabilities. And then it's just about attracting those manufacturers to utilise the local capabilities, but it's very much on the radar.
Appreciate that, because it's something that's very important. I mean, going forward especially. So, yep, that's great. Thank you very much for your answers, and thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thanks for very much for your input this morning. That was Stephen, Rachel, Russell, and Ian. Very, very much, very helpful, informative, and also Stephen, good to see you again. It's nice to. We used to see you down in the corner there up in the chamber. So it's
the naughty corner when he gets naughtier, from what I can see.
You're in the naughty corner, so whenever I was there. So it's good to see you again, Stephen. And
likewise.
Thank you very much for your input this morning, everyone. Okay.
Thank you. Sure. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, members.
Okay, members. We're moving on to the next item, and we're running a little bit over time, so we'll try to keep our questions as succinct as possible, please. And we're going to have an oral briefing from the Ulster Arable Society and Ulster Farmers Union, the Arable Farming Strategy. And I'd like to welcome Roy, David, Robert, Bruce, and Ian. And the Ulster Farmers Union and the Ulster Arable Society has completed a report on developing sustainable arable production. And the report and summary of the recommendations have been published, and they're at page 106 of our text. And I'd like to welcome you here this morning. Again, thank you for your indulgence. We're running a wee little bit over time, so thank you very much. And we'd like to invite you to maybe give a presentation, and then members will ask some questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your time and for the opportunity for the members to meet with you this morning and to consider our recommendations for the sustainable arable production in Northern Ireland. I just want to open by saying a few words of introduction, and then I'll hand over to the remainder of the team to deal with specific issues relating to particular sectors. As you said, the report was compiled by a steering group from members to bring the opportunities and challenges facing the industry to the attention of DAERA as it formulated its policy proposals for industry support in the post-Brexit era. We felt it best to compile one report relating to all land-using arable enterprises, that is, combinable crops, cereals, obviously beans and peas and that sort of stuff, horticulture and potatoes. And this steering group was set up by the Farmers Union and the Ulster Arable Society to come together and do that. The all working members of the arable supply chain, I acted as the researcher and the scribe. So it's not a report by consultants who deliver their findings and move on. It's a report from the industry by those with a long-term commitment to that industry. We talked to and listened to a lot of groups in preparing the recommendations with a view to identifying the support required to sustain the industry as we move forward. The recommendations you said is 2 documents. There's a comprehensive review and analysis, which is over 120 pages. So we also produced then a more graphic and easy read version, which is the recommendations. And if we refer to any pages today, that'll be in that shorter document. These were completed in May and submitted to DAERA to assist them in compiling their policy proposals. Now, we're obviously not going to go through all 12 recommendations in that, but I'd like to draw your attention to a few of the higher level recommendations and cross-cutting elements. First of all, our vision was from the very beginning of a sustainable industry, and that's embedded in all the recommendations. By sustainability, in this case, we're meaning both environmental and commercial sustainability, as the two are obviously interlinked. Our vision is of a progressive mixed farm region. Now, that's not a return to the old region of mixed farms. This is a region where enterprises are so specialised that the crops will be grown by specialist producers on land swapped and leased from grassland farmers. The arable area has been in constant decline over many years, and our concern is that without this mix of crops and grass, Northern Ireland will become a green monoculture, and we won't have the diversity of landscape and habitat which we all love and want to retain. Our vision is summed up in the photograph on the front cover, which shows a mix of grass and arable in an unspoiled, attractive natural habitat. This is not, we emphasise this is not them and us, i.e. livestock versus arable, but it's a question of them working together in a symbiotic circular relationship, which is a benefit to both sectors and the industry as well as the environment. The third element of the vision we want to highlight is that this is not an industry looking for never-ending financial handouts. The vision is of maximising returns from the market, and one which is, with support from public funds as necessary, will develop its business resilience and productivity while enabling investment, environment and environmental development. If we do this right, we can have a win-win, benefiting both productivity and the environment, and that's what is contained in our recommendations, which we think will make best use of scarce public funding. The group presented its recommendations to DAERA, who, like yourselves, were good enough to listen to their case. However, I think it's fair to say that they've been disappointed at the lack of any recognition in the DAERA proposals of their input, and indeed, with the exception of the very welcome and positive opportunities for horticulture, any meaningful reference to the arable sectors. However, we recognise this is a very high-level document, and hopefully, as the proposals are developed, the group will have the opportunity, along with other stakeholders, to engage with DAERA as the concepts are refined and move towards implementation. We will, of course, be submitting a response to the current consultation and are ready to and able to participate fully in discussions going forward. In closing, I'm going to say that we've been extremely impressed by the recent report, strategic review of the sector presented by Sir Peter Kendall. While the DAERA proposals concentrate solely on the production sector, which is their responsibility, Sir Peter has recognised, as we do, the need to increase multi-departmental working and joined-up coverage of the entire supply chain. The supply chain doesn't stop at the farm gate. Sir Peter includes a comment that cereals, potatoes and horticulture can easily be lost in the discussion, and that certainly rings true with us, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today and help to ensure that that is not the case. So with that brief introduction, I'll hand over to Bruce Steele to talk about a few specific elements of the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairperson and members. Thank you very much indeed for the welcome. We really appreciate your time today. I'm Bruce Steele. I'm an agronomist and agri-merchant from County Down. I've been involved with the agricultural sector all my working life. Currently, I'm chairperson of the Ulster Arable Society, one of the co-sponsors of the report, which you have before you, and it's in that capacity that I address you today. I wish to highlight a couple of issues which we raise within the report we have prepared for you. Firstly, research and knowledge transfer. After nearly 40 years in this industry, I'm still amazed and humbled by the enthusiasm, resilience and optimism of the arable farming community. Despite many stressful and frustrating times of bad weather at sowing and harvest times, They simply seem to pick themselves up and look to better times and perhaps some sunshine ahead. However, growers with smaller units often feel forgotten and indeed neglected by the local sources of information and advice, namely AFBI and CAFRE, and we do not wish to see our smaller producers abandoned in favour of the bigger sectors. The US was so concerned to see more arable research undertaken in Northern Ireland that we initiated a farm-scale trial programme to help to evaluate the benefits of potential savings in other input costs by using various livestock manures and novel sources of crop nutrients. This work has now been undertaken by AFBI, and we are very pleased with the progress and the positive findings of the first year's work. I understand the results have already been shared with other research bodies in the Republic of Ireland and GB and will form part of a much bigger collaborative programme. We believe this shows how innovation in a relatively small sector here can have a major impact on other regions. I should also point out that on Tuesday evening past, the UAS, in conjunction with the Ulster Farmers Union and CAFRE, hosted a very successful webinar entitled Understanding Carbon in Arable Rotations. And it was actually very encouraging to see how low the CO2 emissions from arable operations are when compared to the livestock enterprises. Secondly, and as per item 10 on page 25 of your summary booklet, we address generational renewal. This is not unique by any means to arable enterprises, but we fully support the need to encourage young people into the industry and to help them develop their leadership skills, which the industry requires. And we believe this really needs both financial and CPD support. Finally, I represent Northern Ireland on the strategy board of the Voluntary Initiative, which is an industry-led programme which promotes the responsible use of plant protection products through an integrated pest management approach to sustainable agriculture as defined by the Sustainable Use Directive. However, in my daily contact with growers and customers, I am very aware of the ongoing pressure to limit PPP use and the loss of active ingredients due to environmental and human health issues. Of course, we support this where it is based on robust scientific fact and evidence, and we actively encourage IPM practices wherever possible. However, our climate is generally a mild and damp one here, and this encourages the propagation and spread of fungal diseases and weeds. The control of potato blight is a prime example, which the history books will not let us ever forget. Therefore, our arable producers must have unfettered access to the products they need to ensure they remain financially viable and our food is as healthy and wholesome as possible. There are currently serious issues with supply of PPPs and indeed cereal and herbage seeds from GB due to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the additional paperwork and sampling which is required under the EU rules which NI has to follow. This situation is leaving Northern Ireland farmers and growers at a considerable disadvantage to our GB and Republic of Ireland counterparts. Precision breeding, which adopts gene editing traits into cereals and other crop varieties, will undoubtedly have to play a major part in food production in the future. And indeed, GB and Republic of Ireland are already concentrating on the research challenges involved in bringing such traits to the marketplace. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chairperson, and I hand over to Roy Little.
Well, good morning, Chairman and members, and thank you very much indeed for your time today. I'm here today in support of the horticulture sector, and my particular interest is in field vegetable production. Historically, horticulture has not benefited from the same level of support from government as other sectors. It has essentially been underfunded. But we are encouraged by the way horticulture has been highlighted for support in recent communications, for example, the Sir Peter Kendall report and the current consultation on future agricultural policy in Northern Ireland. Indeed, in the consultation, there's a target to double horticultural output in the next 5 to 7 years. An ambitious target, but we feel with support it is achievable. Horticulture is a major contributor to the Northern Ireland economy, approximately £100 million per year, of which is only using 0.3% of the land for 5% of the gross output. And to give some context, the sheep sector contributes about £84 million. Import substitution and extended supply seasons are both opportunities. But as with everything in horticulture, it must be demand-led. The benefits of a healthy and vibrant horticultural sector are well researched and documented. And at the moment, when the overall health of the country is in sharp focus, we must continue to promote the need for everyone to include more locally produced fruit and vegetables in their diets, thus improving overall health and also the environment. We see this as a challenge not just for the Department of Agriculture, but indeed it is a cross-cutting challenge to the health and education departments as well. One of the criticisms levelled at our sector from the department is that we are fragmented and with no coherent message on what is needed to advance industry. To address this, a campaign called Veg NI has been initiated by 4 growers to form a collaborative voice for vegetable growers. It was launched at Balmoral Show last September, and the 4 growers have now grown to 10. And we estimate that these growers account for over 80% of vegetables grown in Northern Ireland. The campaign focuses on 5 pillars: health, environment, community, taste and value. Horticulture has a bright future with many positive and encouraging indicators, from the global trend to a more plant-based diet to the rapid evolution of technology and GPS systems and robotics, which will reduce our reliance on a diminishing labour supply. We must ensure that we have a vibrant, enthusiastic and positive horticulture industry to embrace and develop these opportunities, and most importantly, to encourage young blood into the industry. Thank you very much for your time again, and I'll pass on now to David McElrea.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. I represent the UFU Potato Committee within the group. One of the recommendations, another recommendation that we had was on land tenure. We know that the direction of travel is for longer term land tenure rather than the con-acre system. However, we wanted to highlight for the potato and horticulture sector, we need clean land, which is land which hasn't been in potatoes or veg for a number of years, and we basically need it for 1 year. That helps us with health and quality of the crops we produce. So we basically don't want to be forgotten about in policies for long-term land tenure. We want to be have the ability to get land. Our analysis and recommendations has shown that the industry has a very positive outlook now going forward, and that we can contribute to increased productivity along with environmental gains. However, to do this, we need the new latest technology, which can have a very high capital cost. And as our farms are of a smaller scale, and we can't have the economies of scale, we might need some capital assistance with that. We just don't need to have some of the newest and latest shiny equipment. We're quite wanting to have good quality, warranted, pre-owned equipment, and that should be one of the pillars that the department allow us to have quality used equipment. An example of some of the equipment that we're looking for again is a GPS, high accuracy GPS RTK network, which is very expensive for individual farms over here, but as in other countries, that would be if that was socialised across the whole industry, that opens up all sorts of benefits for our industry and other sectors in agriculture, because if we can put on fertilizer and nutrients to a high level of accuracy, then we can cut the amount that we put on, but yet still create production and environmental gains. In the DAERA future proposals that came out, we were a little bit disappointed that the potatoes were not mentioned in the document. We know it's a high level document, but we want to have our department showing full confidence in the sector. And the same goes for arable as well, that if it's not in the document, it can be seen as if it's not relevant. And we think we're a very relevant sector and we can offer a lot going forward to the industry. I would now like to pass it on to Robert Moore.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Moore. I farm in the northwest of the province on the Donegal border. The farm is predominantly arable, but I also run a purebred suckler herd on land not suited to arable production. I regard myself as a food producer first and foremost, and sorry, I've lost my technology. I regard myself as a food producer first and foremost and an environmental manager second. I do my best to farm in a sustainable manner, and I've changed my management approach a number of times over the last number of years to achieve that. I know I can do better, but that costs money, and that is not being delivered by the supply chain. For many years, we have followed policies of maximising food production, probably at the expense of the environment, mainly because government has a responsibility to ensure sufficient affordable food is produced. But now we are realising some of the damage caused and the need to fix it. The good news is we can fix it, and farming and food production can be a much greater part of the solution than it is of the problem. I have absolutely no doubt of that. The top 30% of cereal producers can compete with the best on yield and quality. And last year, here in Northern Ireland, we had 3 national winners in the UK Cereals Awards. And that's quite something for an area of our size. The cereal sector in particular has the potential to expand and replace imports of cereals, some indeed coming from the other side of the world. But fixing will require big changes, and there will be a significant cost, and yet we still have to produce sufficient affordable food, but in a much more sustainable manner. So continued support will be vital as we transition to a new sustainable system. There's lots that we can do, mainly through science and technology, but we'll maybe pick some of that up later. This report that we spent a number of months preparing recommends a sustainable pathway forward, which will address many of the challenges that food production here currently faces. It is no coincidence that this report is the first of at least 3 reports that I'm aware of last year, up to today, on future agricultural proposals for Northern Ireland, and they're all sending a very similar message. So this report has suggested 12 actions to move towards a much more economically and environmentally sustainable industry. Without doubt, there will have to be a continuation of area-based payments while we try to transition to a more sustainable system, especially so after the recent climate change vote, which will put considerable pressure on both our food industry and the wider economy. The importance of a mixed farming industry cannot be overemphasised, of sectors working together for mutual benefit, so reducing carbon footprint. A good example of this is best use of waste nutrients produced by the livestock sector being properly utilised by the arable sector, thus reducing artificial inputs. Land swapping between lowland sectors in particular will also be important to meet environmental goals and to provide clean land for certain crops. Arable farming is in a better position to deliver and supply environmental wildlife areas and make best use of schemes like the Environmental Farming Scheme. But these have to be proportionate and complement and support the production of food. There is considerable potential in the cereal sector for increased production of alternative added value crops, many of which I'm doing myself, milling oats, milling wheat, malting barley, seed production, proteins, etc., all of which will help the sector achieve increased sustainability to enable it to reduce dependence on subsidy support. Finally, we must have an effective and equitable supply chain that will support and sustain a new food production system. We do not have this at present, and indeed we haven't done so throughout my working life. There needs to be much greater cooperation, communication and full recognition of true cost of production if the sector is to be financially sustainable. We have recommended a number of actions within our report on actions required to deliver an effective, equitable supply chain, and in particular, a groceries code adjudicator, or indeed equivalent, to ensure fairness within the supply chain. If this is ignored, not only will we not be able to deliver environmental benefits, but crucially, we will not be able to feed our own people. So I'm going to leave it there, ladies and gentlemen, and invite questions and discussion.
Thank you for that very comprehensive briefing, and indeed your report, which again is very comprehensive. I suppose there's a number of members who want to ask questions, but the very last point that you picked up on there, Robert, I just want to reference it again. You made reference to the groceries code adjudicator and the need for one. Now, obviously, that there is a groceries code adjudicator, but clearly it's not working. And would you be suggesting an improvement or an expansion of the existing groceries code adjudicator, or a dedicated groceries code adjudicator here for the North?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, ideally, yes, in a perfect world, a grocery code adjudicator here in the North. But the one that we have at the moment covers the UK. It doesn't actually cover farming production. The other thing, of course, is that here, although we're a population of 1.8 million, we're producing food for close to 10 million. And the big market for that is across in GB. So I'm not quite sure how the legal standing of all that would work. But whatever way it works, we will need something like that going forward to ensure fairness and a better supply of margin. There's plenty of margin within the supply chain. It's just not fairly distributed at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. And you see, in terms of throughout all of several of your contributions, you made the importance, you made the reference to generation renewal, getting young blood into industry. Have you? I've been reading the future agriculture proposals myself, and that was one aspect of it which I felt hasn't, got firm proposals written into it. And would that be something that you would have a clear view on, yourselves? Like, whenever we were within the CAP, we had the Young Farmer Scheme, for example. Is there some concrete ideas as to what type of schemes that you would envisage coming forward to facilitate that type of generation renewal that's so important for the future?
Maybe Bruce, do you want to carry that one?
I could take that one, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in that I have just mentioned it to you. Well, I think really what we need to see is, if it's possible, is the hands of our younger generation not being tied to the same extent as they have been, possibly even by generations on the home farm. We very, very regularly come across young people who have been involved in the home farm, following their college education and whatnot for many, many years, and really are not really they're not the decision makers, they're not the policy planners on the farm. They're still the older generation very much in charge. And sometimes within that then as well, you also have the situation of availability of land. And we have actually noted here under item 9, in our issue here, that we really say, under issue 10, we're saying that the scheme is required to free up land that's been held by farmers who are actually now wishing to leave the industry. We just would love to see some sort of a procedure in place that would allow that to become available specifically to younger members of the farming community. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to just pass around the room here, and we have, first on the list is Rosemary.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your presentation. I want to concentrate, perhaps, David, if it's possible, just on potatoes and seed potatoes, etc. David, can you talk about to rejuvenate the local seed potato sector and to meet the increased demand for quality potato seed, and then you go on to you want to increase the proportion of homegrown table potatoes, etc. Can you give me an update really on the latest regarding importing of seed potatoes? Your difficulties, or is that clear now, or have you had difficulties?
It's a difficult one. We're still in a bit of limbo land about getting in potatoes, and we have a recommendation into the department that we need to get in high grade quality seed potatoes of the highest grade and highest health status. After that, we could propagate a lot more here ourselves. Yeah. Northern Ireland used to export 250,000 tonnes of potatoes out of Northern Ireland around the world. Now we're an importer of potatoes. There's something's went badly wrong in the last couple of generations, but we see now that the industry is wanting to step up to the mantle. We have got good quality land. We're high in the Northern Hemisphere. We've got low disease pressure, low virus pressure through aphids. So we're very well placed now to expand the industry. And that's where we want to promote that and push it forward.
Of course, yeah.
In the short term, we need access to the highest of health status potatoes coming in, mini tubers basically.
So where would you envisage those high grade quality seed potatoes coming from? Are you talking about them coming from the rest of the United Kingdom, Great Britain? Are you speaking of them coming from Europe or further afield?
From the stem cuttings that come in to create the mini tubers, some of the nuclear stock is held in Scotland. At Saska in Scotland, and that there has to have the ability to come in. We have to have the ability to get the very highest of health stuff. After that, we can propagate it ourselves, but we need the ability to get new varieties wherever they're bred in the world. We need to get those into here because that'll help us to be more productive and efficient.
And has this problem that you've had with getting seed potatoes into Northern Ireland, has that actually reduced your ability then to produce and to perhaps export them potatoes also, I take it, of recent years?
Well, this is a new phenomena, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it has to be worked out yet how that's going to play out. Is it going to be is it a short-term blip or is it a real opportunity for here? We don't really know.
Okay, thank you. And just one other thing I want to say to you. You over many of you that spoke, you were quite critical of CAFRE, perhaps needing to look a little bit more or pay more attention to the arable farming sector. Can I say in what sense? What do you want CAFRE to do to raise the profile of the arable farming sector? What would you like to see CAFRE doing?
Maybe should I come in on that one again?
Certainly, whoever.
Yep. Well, I suppose, first of all, even when you're at Greenmount College, the actual area that's involved and the courses that are involved and the percentage of time that's allocated to cereal production and to, steering students with regard to agronomy and crop management and soil management seems to be very, very, very limited. And certainly CAFRE themselves, for some of their established growers, do run these business development groups, BDGs as they call them, and they seem to be a link to a limited number of growers. But we just feel that really there are many, many young people out there who would even maybe want to bring an arable proportion back into the farm again, where it hasn't been for many years because it has gone maybe rather monoculture towards grass production or whatever, for milk or beef or whatever it is. And we would love to see those young people being better instructed and better encouraged to look at possibly starting arable rotations on their own farm, but doing it from a point of knowledge, that they are not just grasping at straws, nor that they're, dare I say, relying on someone like me to come and help them and to tell them how to do the thing. They really should be doing it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, can I just follow up on that? So in other words, increasing the knowledge and ability for young people. So would you like to see, and please forgive me for saying this, we talk about our backyard hens, somebody having a group of 10, maybe 30 hens in their backyard just to produce their own family eggs. Would you like to see then perhaps a little bit of encouragement for people to have their own garden and the growing of their own potatoes? A few, I'm not saying wholesale, but a whole lot of potatoes, but just to encourage the knowledge and understanding and increase the awareness of the importance of potatoes. Encouraging young members to do that.
Yes, I have no problem with that at all, because at the end of it, it's still hands-on. It's still bringing another sphere of farming, back into their home unit, their home place. Absolutely, no problem with that whatsoever.
Okay. Sure, but maybe I could add, if I could add to that. I mean, essentially, anything that stimulates interest in young people in coming into the industry has got to be good. Yep. However we do that. So I think that would be very important. The other thing in relation to CAFRE and AFE, I mean, we fully understand that it's very difficult for them to cover all the specialist sectors and the minor sectors, such as you get when you get into horticulture and so on. That's very difficult to do in minor or niche enterprises. So what we would like to see is access to that information from wherever it comes. And the world leading expertise, maybe in Holland, it may be wherever, but the industry needs the very best of information from wherever it can be gleaned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We need to move very swiftly on because we're running out of time here now. Harry?
Okay, and thank you again. Thank you very much, Chair. This is probably directed more at you, Bruce. And in terms of your research, Northern Ireland being a very, very small country, but yet a huge variation in landscapes and soil types. I'm just wondering, does this make your job complicated or does it make it more interesting? Thank you.
Sorry, do you mean actually me and my day-to-day work? It's obviously, it makes it actually probably does both. It actually makes it more challenging because there are areas where drainage is an issue, and obviously higher clay percentages in the soil, you're going to have an issue on the soil structure. But then you go to land, as I was in yesterday, just towards the Downpatrick area here of County Down, where it's free draining soil, and it's a totally different ball game entirely. But yes, there is fantastic variability within our soil type, but that's all part of the job. Yeah, it makes it much what it's all about. Yeah, very much so.
Good. And we've mentioned there just about helping our youth, and this is to the whole group. We have learned a lot in the committee and visited different farms, and encouraging our women and our ladies is a great thing as well. What comment would you make on that?
If you're asking me again on that one, no problem whatsoever. We have actually managed, I noticed even in the press at the weekend, a lot of young people, young ladies and females involved particularly in the young farmer side of things. Yeah, and a lot of those are becoming more and more involved on the day-to-day running of farms. I'm out on the road on call every day, and I meet a lot of young ladies now driving tractors and doing all sorts of jobs that the fellas can do, and perfect. Great to see a good mix, yeah.
Good, excellent, great answers. And just maybe the whole group or whoever would like to take this question, how do you see the climate change bill affecting what you do? Whoever would like to take that. Thank you.
Well, I come in on that one. I don't want to get into the political side of it, but I think what is terribly important as we go forward, I think in my presentation I highlighted the fact that we will obviously have to change, and we will have to work with the climate rather than against it. But we have to do that from a position of education, of knowledge, of science background. And there are a lot of proposals at the moment going along on those lines. The most recent one coming out of the department is for this LiDAR technology and measuring our soils. I'm a great believer in if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we have to have a point from which we start. And it could well be with this new technology, when we measure our soils in Northern Ireland, we might actually find that we're in a much better position than we actually think we are. And we can then measure and move on from that point of view. The other point I would make about the climate change, I did highlight it there, but I wasn't making a political point. I was simply saying that, yes, we have to address it, but we have to address it against a background that we still need, all of us need to eat. And what we must not do is move our industry here in Northern Ireland, cut it back to the point where we simply then have to rely on imports from the other side of the world. That doesn't make any sense at all. And I would also like to emphasise that although we are predominantly a grass-based industry, in Northern Ireland, there is potential for us to be a much more mixed industry, and I think we have tried to point that out. We can work with each other. That does not mean that dairy farmers have to start growing cereals or vice versa, but there is the opportunity to swap land, to work much more closely together. And I think there are things that the department can bring forward to help encourage that and make that happen. I think there's a very bright future for agriculture in Northern Ireland. And when you take someone like Sir Peter Kendall coming here and saying that our industry has a really inspiring, exciting story to tell, coming from a 2,000-acre farm, from president of a farmers' union with 55,000 members, for him to say that about Northern Ireland, I think is a huge compliment and something we should build on.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, folks, last is Claire.
Thanks very much, Chair. And
last but not least, she said.
I'm sorry?
I should said last but not least.
Always a lagger. But listen, guys, thanks very much. I just first really do want to say welcome. Certainly within my time on this committee, I think that this is the first time that we've heard from yourselves and your sector. So just on that basis alone, welcome and well done for putting yourselves in the picture there as well. But I maybe want to touch on what you're raising in terms of maybe lack of support, for want of maybe a better word. If I'm putting words in your mouth, please change them. But from the department for your industry, and then I'm looking at your report that you sent through to us as well, and just on the environmental interactions, you mentioned that biodiversity and loss of species has become an issue of increasing concern, and I'm just wondering if you could let us know just on both of those issues, maybe in terms of lack of support for the work that you're doing and impacts that you're feeling, how that's playing out for you personally and in your business.
I'll maybe take that one, Robert, if you want.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, from the lack of support for the horticulture industry in Northern Ireland is historical. We just have not been able to tap in to most areas of funding. Now that's not strictly true. The Tier 1 and Tier 2 measures that have been announced in the last 3 or 4 years have been relevant to us. But what we need in our sector is a more general type of a grant system, in that it's not specific to certain types of machinery as such. It's more to do with making a business case for something and then following that through, because especially a lot of the machinery in our business is very, very specialised, and we need to have to be able to make our own case for that and go forward on that. I suppose from the biodiversity type, from that question, I would just like to say that we contribute greatly to that. I say if we didn't have the vegetable crops around where I live here in North Down, it would be a very green scene we'd be looking out on, unfortunately. So we need to encourage that biodiversity from that point of view as well.
Thank you.
I think could I make a further comment there, Chair? Yeah, I think one of the problems is it goes back for a number of years, Claire, that the focus of production has been on producing food. That has been sort of general government policy. Lots of food, cheap food. I suppose the mentality from after the war that we must not allow ourselves to get into a food shortage position again. That is what has driven food production, and it has been at the expense of the environment. We have then, in more recent years, tried to bring out schemes to help the environment. But I suppose my criticism would be that those schemes have been poorly thought through. They haven't, in many cases, been fit for purpose. I don't have time today to go into the details of that, but I can give you details of that. And I think when we're designing schemes, they must be designed with us as farmers, so that because we know what's practical and what works. And that is going to have to be the future. We are going to have a mixture of environmental schemes and environmental methods of producing food. We can't have one extreme or the other. It has to be a mixture of the two, and one will complement the other. And I think that is the way forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was really very informative, very helpful this morning. And Roy, David, Robert, Bruce, and Ian, thanks very, very much for coming, and well done producing your report. And listen, we hope to see and hear from you again. Okay. So thank you very much.
Could I just say, Chair, that if any of you want to come and visit a farm, or certainly my farm, or possibly any of them, I would be more than happy to do that, because getting out on farm and seeing what happens is so important. So if you want follow-up, or if you want to come and look at the farm, I would be more than happy to host you.
We may well follow you up on that invitation, Robert, and thanks very much for making it. We did have the opportunity during the summer to get out on farm in August once the restrictions started to lift, and I suppose if had not been for the COVID restrictions, we'd been out far more. But thanks for that invitation, Robert, and we may well follow that up. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, members, we'll move on now to item number 8 on the agenda, written briefing ESR, our report on the Environment 2021 Act, Commencement and Saving Provision Order NI 2022. You'll recall that we received these regulations last week, which will bring into effect local provisions relating to the Environment Act 21. The ESR has provided the committee with an assessment of the regulations, which is in the table pack, and will be included in the ESR's formal report, which will be published tomorrow. The ESR has not done the committee's attention to any particular aspect of the regulations. So can I put the question that the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs considered the Environment 2021 Act, Commencement and Saving Provision Order, NI 2022, and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly? Okay. Thank you. Item number 9, members, on the agenda is a written briefing from the Clerk, a committee position paper on the radioactive substance framework. This is page 266 of your pack as a draft committee position paper on the radioactive substance common framework. As you'll be aware, this framework was published in December, and the committee began its scrutiny following the Christmas recess. The committee is expected to publish its position on all frameworks which come before us. The Clerk has drafted this paper on behalf of the committee. Nick, do you want to give us an update, a briefing on this, please?
Chair, yes, indeed. Thank you. Members will recall after the Christmas recess, we discussed the impending publication of the 15 common frameworks under DAERA's remit, and this was one of the first that we have seen, and it was published on the 16th of December. And as per the agreed methodology for scrutinising the common frameworks, this common framework was designated in as Group 3, which is probably the least level of contention and with the least level of complex issues. And in order to facilitate scrutiny of that, the committee team has undertaken a document review of the framework and has indeed corresponded with DAERA for its opinion and views on the common framework. So, as Chair mentioned, at page 266 of your packs is a draft position paper on the framework itself, and really the first few pages of that are simply background and preliminary material, and I would propose to walk through members from page 273 to discuss the salient aspects of the common framework and some observations the committee may wish to put forward. So the common framework essentially sets out a proposed structure for administrations locally in Wales, England and Scotland to discuss policy regarding radioactive substances, which includes licensing for the use of substances, security and transport, radioactive waste and other issues. The Common Framework specifically notes that the UK has signed a cooperation agreement with Euratom and will continue to be obligated to maintain safety standards that apply internationally. The overarching purpose of the framework is to provide a mechanism for the different administrations to discuss radioactive substance policy and aim to achieve a consensus where that is possible and to discuss areas of potential policy divergence. And a similar theme I suspect we will see across all common frameworks is that proposed changes to policy made by one or more of the UK government, the Scottish government or the Welsh government in a way that has policy or regulatory implications for the rest of the UK, or rule changes brought about here locally due to compliance with the protocol, will be discussed and managed under the provisions of the framework. So the framework will be delivered within a three-tiered governance structure. The first level tier is called the Radioactive Substances Delivery Board, which will be the primary discussion and decision-making forum comprising policy officials from all jurisdictions. It has the authority to make recommendations to ministers and the more senior level tier in the structure. The RSDB will be obligated to liaise with stakeholders to identify any emerging issues or areas where policy may need to be changed. It will be chaired by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and will meet at least 3 times a year. The more senior tier above the RSDP is the Radioactive Substances Programme Board, or the RSPB, which will comprise senior civil service officials from departments across all jurisdictions and effectively aims to act as the senior decision maker and arbiter in the cases of dispute. It is proposed within the terms of reference that the group will only meet to discuss significant strategic or financial issues or to facilitate dispute resolution. The third level tier in the structure is that of what is described as portfolio ministers, who will have ultimate responsibility for making policy decisions based on any recommendations received, resolving contentious issues, and engaging to resolve disputes where resolution has not been achieved at lower levels. In terms specifically with dispute resolution, there is an approach outlined in the Common Framework. However, it should be noted that the framework states that radioactive substance policy generally is a non-contentious area, and it is not envisaged that there will be significant points of difference. It's also highlighted that there are currently areas of difference between different jurisdictions in the UK. For example, Scotland manages its high activity waste differently to other areas, and this does not preclude collaboration on other areas of policy. However, the framework's dispute resolution procedure is designed to facilitate a mechanism for managing issues if, for example, there is a lack of agreement on a policy proposal or a genuine impact on the interests of another party. And essentially, the RSDP has primary responsibility for seeking to resolve disputes, and issues will be raised to this forum in the first instance. Members are obligated to work through potential solutions and seek to resolve them without the need for escalation. However, if the RSDP is unable to achieve the resolution, the matter can be referred to the RSPB, the more senior tier, at the triggering party's request, and then further to the portfolio ministers as a matter of last resort for only the most contentious issues and following exhaustion of all other options. In terms of monitoring and enforcement, the Common Framework has to undergo an annual review by the RSDP, which will also evaluate its terms of reference. And this is designed to ensure that there is flexibility to adapt the framework in the future in response to any substantive changes in governance arrangements in any jurisdiction. In terms of protocol-related issues, there are aspects of EU law in this policy area that will continue to apply under the auspices of the protocol, specifically Council Directive 2006/117 Euratom regarding the supervision and control of shipments of radioactive waste. The Common Framework, as I've already stated, enables administrations in GB to consider any rule or policy changes brought about by future revision of these EU regulations and pertaining to how they relate in Northern Ireland. And the framework specifically states that a relevant Northern Ireland Executive Minister will have the ability to trigger a review under the dispute resolution procedure in respect of any concerns they have of GB-only proposals. Turning then to some considerations and recommendations the committee may wish to take forward as scrutiny. We did write to DAERA for their view on the Common Framework, and they have advised the committee that it considers the framework to be non-contentious because it builds already upon pre-existing structures for engagement between jurisdictions, and that there is very limited prospect of policy divergence, given that all administrations will continue to align with the same international standards. Further, DAERA has advised that the activity in terms of the use and transit of radioactive substances is negligible, and there are no nuclear facilities in situ locally, obviously. In terms of the protocol-related EU legislation, this applies only to radioactive waste which will be shipped from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, which happens maybe once or twice per annum. In this context, DAERA does not envisage there to be any contention in terms of divergence with other jurisdictions. So on page 278, you will see some suggested observations on the framework itself. So while the framework itself sets out a structure for resolving disputes, there is comparatively little criteria for determining whether an issue is significantly contentious for it to warrant escalation to the more senior tier in the framework. And further, the document states that the framework provides a mechanism to discuss proposed policy changes where one or more of the UK Government, Scottish Government or Welsh Government proposes to change rules in a way that has policy or regulatory implications for the rest of the UK, or where rules in Northern Ireland change in alignment with the EU. This suggests that Northern Ireland may be prohibited from proposing policy changes under the auspices of the framework, which are unconnected to its obligations under retained EU law. Another observation is that while the Common Framework alludes to the fact that portfolio ministers may refer a matter ultimately to intergovernmental relations ministers for review if they are unable to resolve a dispute, it is unclear as to how that issue would be managed at IGR level, and if the dispute resolution process, as outlined in the review of intergovernmental relations in January 2022, would apply. There's also no reference to continued parliamentary engagement in terms of the review, effectiveness and operation of the Common Framework, and it is unclear to which forums issues should be highlighted in the event that Northern Ireland is precluded from aligning with policy changes made in Great Britain as a result of compliance with the with the protocol, and whom would represent Northern Ireland's interests at such a forum. So in terms of some potential suggested recommendations, that DAERA should forward the committee's observations and recommendations to the Cabinet Office as part of the overall Common Framework scrutiny process. I think it may be prudent for the committee to consider if Northern Ireland will have the ability to propose policy changes to other jurisdictions in Great Britain which are independent of its obligations to maintain parity with EU legislation. It might also be helpful for DAERA to provide a short annual update to the committee in respect to the functioning and effectiveness of the Common Framework. and to notify it on an ongoing basis of any changes which are made to the terms of reference of the groups established under the Common Framework and the Concordat. I've also suggested that the committee may wish to be informed of any substantive policy disputes that are managed under the auspices of the framework pertaining to Northern Ireland activities. And it may be helpful to clarify the appropriate forum for consideration of issues in the scenario whereby NI is compelled to maintain parity with EU law in radioactive substance policy and other jurisdictions in the UK do not follow suit, leading to divergence, and whether this would be addressed at a specialised committee on the Northern Ireland Protocol or a different governance structure. And perhaps it would be helpful to clarify if the Secretary of State will assume responsibility for Northern Ireland's interests in the functioning of the Common Framework should the local executive collapse. And it may also be helpful to seek DAERA's a view on whether it is assured that and satisfied that the structures within the framework will be suitably independent in order to discharge their responsibilities fully. Mr. Chair, those are observations and considerations in relation to the Radioactive Substances Common Framework. I'll be very happy to take comments, questions or queries from members on that.
Okay. Patsy. Patsy?
Sorry, this thing's off and on at times.
We hear you now.
Good enough, Chair. Chair, just the one concern about these radioactive materials that I have is, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, is that some of these mines, if they are opened, that they could be used as disposal or dumping grounds for radioactive materials. So I would really like to hear from the department what protections they are going to put in place so that none of Northern Ireland is opened or used or abused, probably is the better word, as a dumping ground for radioactive materials. What protections will be built in there to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah. Let me get you here now. Nick, can you pick that up there, Nick?
Chair, yes, indeed, certainly. Patsy, we can write to the department on that specific matter about the protections for how radioactive waste will be managed locally and ensure that it's done within an environmentally conscious context, and that its policy on that is aligned both with best practice and its Euratom obligations. Excuse me.
Chair, that wasn't necessarily my point. It was to see what measures the department are going to take to prevent against just radioactive materials being dumped on us.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear that, Nick?
Chair, yes, indeed. Yes, we'll write to the department on that and seek what measures they will put in place to mitigate against that.
Yeah, I think that would be important. I think that would be important to satisfy any public concern around this here matter. So you write off the department about that, Nick, then?
Yes, certainly, Chair. We'll write to the department on that.
All right. Okay. Does any more members want to come in on that particular issue? Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, Nick, then you can get that off to the department and then we'll wait till we will get the correspondence hopefully sooner than later.
Chair, yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, we'll move on now to item number 10, correspondence. You'll recall the ongoing discussion with the department about their projections that achieving net zero by 2050 would cost at least 9 million per annum. In the table of papers, you'll see that the department has written to the committee in light of further engagement with the CCC to advise that it will revise these projections and update and republish its RIA. Members, okay to note this? In your table pack, members, you will see a reply from the department in respect of revision of its ammonia advice protocol. The department has yet failed to provide a definitive date for the launch of its consultation on the ammonia strategy. The department has also clarified that it considers that an LCM would be the most efficient and expedient way of bringing about a local offence in respect of pet abduction within the existing mandate, which it considers to be uncontentious. The whole packet will also see the department's reply in respect of timeline to open applications for Tier 2 Farm Business Improvement Scheme. The department consulted with the RDP Monitoring Committee on the revised application criteria and considered opening the scheme in December, but deferred it until after the Christmas period. Our correspondence from page 283 of your packs is correspondence between the House of Lords and DEFRA in relation to protocol issues, and a social value monitoring report which states that all projects managed by DERA have received a green assurance rating. Members content to action the remainder of the correspondence suggested index sheet? Okay. Okay, members, on the forward work programme, page 295, the committee team has engaged with a number of organisations to facilitate stakeholder discussions on several common frameworks in the next couple of weeks to help inform our scrutiny, subject to the publication of the frameworks by the end of this week. I'd also like to remind members that this evening we will be facilitating our stakeholder event to support a review of the challenges facing women in the local agricultural sector. Can I take agreement for the forward work programme? Okay. Members, any other business item number 12 you want to raise? Okay.
Yeah, can I just ask, has the link been sent out yet for that Women in Agriculture stakeholder event?
Nick?
Chair, no, my intention was to circulate it immediately after the meeting, Rosemary.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, and members, the next formal meeting will take place on Thursday, 10th February at 10 o'clock and will be a hybrid meeting streamed on live on the Assembly website. Should also say that just be on standby, just in the event that we do get an unscheduled meeting, an extraordinary meeting, should the Permanent Secretary come back to us to give us an update on the implications of the Minister's decision to cease inspections at the ports. So just sort of be on standby for that should we receive that correspondence. Okay, members, we're just going to move now to the closed session. For there's a number of items that we need to just discuss. I want to thank any members of the public who have been logged on here this morning. So, Nick, can you take us offline and let the members know when we're offline?
Certainly, Chair, let you know in a moment.
Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.